Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Face the Change in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6. The girl is tasked with showing him around. Her name is Karen, and Naruto can't decipher the way she looks at him. Curious, inquisitive, on the verge of asking a question that never makes it past her lips. The attention isn't bad though, nor hateful, so he doesn't mind. She looks unwilling and annoyed, but she dutifully takes him from one corner of the base to the other. Well, base isn't the right word. For lack of a better one, Naruto would have to settle for village. Otogaku, they call it. They have the headbands to go with it, and they have the pride too, that Naruto is accustomed to in Konoha. Though he left his own headband with Sasuke, he isn't about to pick up another one. He wonders what Sasuke will do with it. Keep it, throw it away, destroy it? Will he try to give it back, one day? Will Naruto take it? He tunes back into Karen's instructions to distract himself from those thoughts. She is talking about bathroom turns and communal kitchen, and Naruto is reminded, quite unpleasantly, of his years at the orphanage. Well, maybe he will have to battle for his share of food here too, but at least no one will try to punish him or stop the fight. Naruto didn't expect to see so many people. There isn't a single one he feels like talking to, but he will have to do with their presence. They are all under Orochimaru's command, according to Karen, either indebted to him or pledged to his services, often both. Orochimaru is their master, ruler of this little kingdom. One could say cage. He offers them shelter, sanctuary and, Naruto guesses, some sort of purpose. In exchange, they do whatever he orders them to do. There is little doubt about the nature of their work. She mostly ignores the people they cross paths with. Naruto recognizes her particular brand of haughty dismissal as what it is. She doesn't want any of them getting too close. Naruto isn't expecting this new life to be pleasant. He wonders what all these people are still doing here, wonders about her. Then again, the same could be said about himself, and the answer is as simple for him as it probably is for most of them. He has nowhere else to go. Eventually, she leads him to his room. Set in a long corridor of identical rooms hosting some of Orochimaru's men, it has a bed, a desk, a couple of shelves for personal belongings. A marked improvement from the orphanage, at least he won't have to share with 5 other boys. But he can't help the weird double vision of another room, overlooking a small garden left untended because Naruto liked the plants to grow unrestrained in Shisui. He shakes his head as if it will dislodge the thought. It almost works. My room is a few doors down. I'll leave you to settle, then I'll take you to the master. She leaves him to his own devices. The room is dimly lit, no sunlight underground. He doesn't have that much to unpack. The picture of Team 7 stays carefully wrapped at the bottom of his backpack. Looking around, it strikes him suddenly, what this reminds him of. The Umbu headquarters. He doesn't remember how he ended up there and how he managed to wander around. He explored a lot of places in Konoha he shouldn't have, by virtue of being easily ignored and forgotten. The Umbu and their blank mask, their uniform, their hidden blades. Lurking around the village and spying on him at random. They didn't all live at the headquarters, as far as he knew. Shisui and Itachi never did. But most of the Umbu didn't have any family. Kakashi, and his friend Tenzo, and the ones who taught Sakura Kenjutsu. Though those two eventually moved in together, no? Maybe that was the point. To not be alone. To have something resembling a family. Naruto looks around him, at the bare walls and the used furniture. It seems fortunate that neither family nor a home is what he came looking for. They made it to the hideout just before nightfall. There was no light and no sound coming from the old temple, which meant the others weren't back yet. Karen hoped they hadn't run in as much trouble as their group. It had only been a few days, less than a week, yet she felt like she was returning from war. This felt as much like a home as anything, despite them only living there for a few months, and when she dropped on the wooden patio, she could finally, at long last, relax a little. Naruto rushed to her, concerned. Are you alright? Are you hurt? She tugged at his haori hard enough to make him tumble down next to her. She grabbed his arm, rested her head on his shoulder, and let out a long sigh. Don't move. I'm so tired I might pass out. He obeyed and stayed still, only for a minute, before shifting to wrap an arm around her shoulders. She grumbled, but it was more comfortable like this, so she let it pass. Behind her she heard the others move around the common area. Niji was moving, most likely, getting dinner started while Gaara watched his every step. It was creepy, but Niji didn't seem to mind. He didn't seem to mind most of Gaara's weird behaviors, which was the reason why they got along so well. They didn't have to share a room, as there were enough for all of them, yet they did. She couldn't pretend to understand it. The temple was a gift from the foxes, a sanctuary protected by their blessings that couldn't be found if they didn't want it to be. Karen paid for it as much as Naruto did, even if she hadn't signed their contract. They both had more than enough chakra to spare for the greedy foxes, and the foxes gave back well. They were safe here. It had become riskier for them to step outside and roam the nearby roads, remote as they were. The nearest village was an hour away by foot, and they visited when need be, but kept to themselves as much as they could. The villagers, mostly fishermen and construction workers employed in the larger cities of the south, asked no questions and let no eyes nor ear wander. They didn't seem fond of shinobi, and their sympathy stemmed from their impression that this weird group of mismatched teenagers was on the run from the hidden villages. They weren't wrong. That didn't leave much room for aimless wandering. Maybe that was part of the reason why she had agreed so easily to their trip to Suna, despite the risks. She was never leaving the temple again. I'm sorry, Naruto muttered after a while. She scoffed. About what? What could you possibly be blamed for this time? About Orochimaru. She gritted her teeth. He never knew when to let go. Granted, she wouldn't let him, she had a hard time letting it go too, even if she knew he had done his best in the heat of the moment, that things would probably still had gone to hell either way. Even if she was just as much to blame, for warning him too late, for her hesitation. She couldn't help being mad at him though. Had he just stopped to think, for a second? How is that counter seal going then? It's going, he admitted, sheepish. He wouldn't have the nerve to lie to her. Everything would be solved, or well, that particular Orochimaru issue would be solved, if they could just come up with that stupid counter seal the man wanted so badly. But they couldn't get it to work, no matter how hard they tried. Naruto tried harder since he was much better at sealing than her, but he was still not the best reader and she was the one deciphering the Uzumaki scrolls they had snatched up on their way out of Otagakure for him. The counter seal worked, in theory. It just had the inconvenient side effect of killing whoever it would be applied to in the process. Granted, that would also solve the issue, but even if Orochimaru wasn't able to come up with the counter seal either, he was certainly proficient enough in their art to recognize a seal that would kill him. After all, he had taught them a large part of what they knew of Fuinjutsu. We'll figure it out. I'm sorry. Shut up. Naruto was very good at playing the blame game with himself. Fortunately, he was the only one. Gaara probably didn't have enough of a grasp of what happened around him to draw causes and correlations. As for Niji, he could have been just as bad. He was, after all, equally to blame for this mess by sole virtue of his presence back in Oto. But he did that neat mental trick where he managed to lay the blame for literally everything that happened to him at his clan's feet, and its leader specifically. It was their fault he had ran away and ended up in Oto in the first place, so the fact that it was him catching Orochimaru's interest that had eventually driven them away from the hidden village was his uncle's fault too. Karen didn't find much fault in the reasoning. The man seemed perfectly detestable, and if that saved her from having to convince another idiot that they weren't, in fact, responsible for everything wrong in their world, she was more than fine with it. Naruto helped her to her feet when Niji called them in to eat. She wasn't joking when she said she was on the brink of passing out, and only the growling of her empty stomach convinced her to make a stop at the dinner table before going to crash on her bed. Even the benefit of a bath didn't seem worth the effort right now. She knew she wouldn't settle fully until they were all safely back home. The temple was nice, the nicest they had had, but it wasn't the point. They needed to be together for things to be okay. As long as they were, nothing bad would happen to them. Karen can't help but be drawn to the boy. She is mad at herself for it. It is pointless, stupid. What does it matter, if they are from the same clan? Would he even care if he knew? He doesn't seem much interested in his family and origins, all he does is brood about the friends he left behind in his village. Karen doesn't get it. She would have given anything to be part of a village, live safely behind its walls, to have a place in this world. She doesn't like him much, yet she is drawn to him all the same. It doesn't help that his chakra is so appealing to her, sharp and bright, tempting. That despite the bitter edges of the Kyuubi's presence, it reminds her of her mother. It's not like there is anything really binding them together. He has the name but not the history, he doesn't even know what it means, while she has the history but not the name. Her mother forbade her to ever use it, fearing it would put a target on their back. It didn't save either of them from being enslaved anyway. Yet she kept the secret. Most of the people who were aware of her name died in the attack on Kusagakur, that saw so many casualties that her mother worked to death trying to heal them all. The last one to know was Zosui, her personal shackles once she took over her mother's duties. She took advantage of the attack on their outpost to sneak up on him and nick him with a poisoned blade. He didn't have time to get back at her, the whole place was razed to the ground, and she survived because she had no qualms about using these people's corpses as a cover and hiding away until it was all over. Orochimaru found her then. He was curious about her abilities, and he put it to good use just like Kusagakur had done, but he never cared much about her origins, beyond what it made of her. A chakra source, and nothing more. It was almost offending. She has their physical traits, her mother told her, and she has their signature chakra reserves too. But the Uzumaki are considered extinct by most. Of course it is better that it remained a secret, yet foolishly, she longs for someone to know, for it to exist outside of her own heart. Which is why it is so tempting, to grab one of the Uzumaki scrolls lying around on Naruto's desk, to just open it and to let someone know, for the first time in years. She has to follow him around, keep an eye on him. He meditates a lot, and he talks to the nine-tailed fox if his muttering is anything to go by, but mostly he pores over the scrolls. Naruto stole some from his village, the rest, Orochimaru had his people found it for the boy. The clan's inheritance only opens for its descendants, to her master's great frustration, so she is supposed to spy on Naruto, now that he is no longer so skittish in her presence. But the boy is not a complete idiot. He keeps the scrolls hidden when he's not using them and carefully closed when she's near, unaware that she could open them too, and she itches to do so badly at times that she has to leave the room lest she gave in to the urge. It's not worth it, she keeps telling herself, and she ignores the small part of her heart that is cowering in fear, that the scrolls won't open, that for some reason she won't be worthy of it. She doesn't bear the name. Nobody knows. Maybe it is not even true. So she watches him, still and silent. They have nothing to say to each other. Well, there is that one thing, but no matter how much time she wastes thinking about it, she can't find the time nor the way to broach the subject. It is absurd to cling to this. It is just a name. Maybe she should go back to the southern hideout. The work up there is boring, but at least it's solitary enough that she wouldn't have to deal with self-pity and inadequacy. The loneliness is appealing after months stuck in Otagakure. It's not like she's needed here. Except Orochimaru insists she helps, though Naruto seems to be doing fine on his own, bent over his ceiling, testing it on himself, his walls, and the sound shinobi foolish enough to try to bully him. He has already destroyed 2 training grounds and had to change rooms after blowing a hole in the last one, but still Orochimaru seems pleased by his experiments. Naruto is a direct access to those secrets, to the lost art of the Uzumaki Fuinjutsu, and Orochimaru is nothing if not patient. He is biding his time. He'll ask for your help, he says to Karen. He seems certain of it. He is right, as he always is. One day Naruto lays a scroll in front of her. Read it to me. She snarls, displeased at his tone. Why would I do that? His bravado is much thinner than her own, he is usually the one to back down. The scowl eases as he scrambles for an answer, uncharacteristically nervous. It'll be easier to follow. Just read the steps to me. Please. Suspicious, she agrees with a frown, making sure to convey she's onto him and his bullshit, before moving to the scroll. She chokes on her spit, outraged. What the? What's wrong with you? What? What did I do? This is a scroll for She must be as red as her hair. She can't just say it out loud, that's probably what he wants, he's just trying to mock her. She wants to storm out, but it's the first time he does let her get a look at the scrolls. Even if it's... He looks at her with confusion, as if he isn't aware of what he's doing. Very well. Two can play that game. She picks up the scroll, clears her throat, and does her best not to stumble on the words. Prolonged erection seal. He screeches higher than even she did. What the, that's not it. That's what is written right there. He looks at the paper dubiously, as if he didn't believe her, while she taps the characters furiously. Is he trying to make her believe he didn't do it on purpose? Does he think her that stupid? Ah. Yeah. Well. No. Take that one. Instead. He throws another unrolled scroll at her, unable to meet her gaze. Serves him right for doing such a dumb joke. What did he think would happen? Why is there even such a seal in there? Soul-binding seal, she reads out loud. Yeah, he answers awkwardly. That. It doesn't look that complicated for such an ominous title. He waits, expectant, and she makes a point to let the uneasy silence linger for a while, just because, before deeming him punished enough. It starts with a 5-point seal, downward. Really? Next thing she knows he's at her side, peering over her shoulder. Yes, really. Why? Well, it's drawn upward here. But it says downward. See. She points at the scribbled instructions. She doesn't know which one they ought to follow. The next drawing looks nothing like the first, at least 5 steps lacking the accompanying illustrations, so there's no telling. But the way he squints his eyes and looks unsure, the way he keeps staring at the sentence, as if. Next it says to lay those symbols at each point, she adds, pointing at a string of characters spreading across the sheet. It will have to be folded later, and it must be straight enough. Okay, let me see. His hand is steady and precise as he copies the small marks on the blank sheet he laid on his desk. There are dozens of them scattered around the room, pinned to the walls, filled in every corner. He is almost manic in his studies. She wonders what he hopes to achieve. These have to be linked twice, it says, in the 12th order. You know what that means. But it's 12th. You're sure? I can read, thank you. He scowls harder. She has to test it out. And next, what does it say, he asks, looking at her expectantly. She points at a character. Another 5-point seal. Up this time. What? That's not possible. It's written right there. It is not, in fact, written right there. The word says the opposite. She has her fingers right under it. That's. You can't lay 2 seals in opposite direction on top of each other. I'm just telling you what's written here. She sees the moment he gives up, and she feels bad all at once, when he clenches his jaw and takes a step backward, when he glares at her and tries to look angry, when he is just hurt. You're lying. He knows because he's very proficient in sealing, but not because he can tell the difference between the 2 characters. Because he can't, not for sure anyway, not confidently enough that he can judge if she's having him on. Because he's not a good enough reader to tell. That's why he asked her. Most of the scrolls have very detailed illustrations, but some are much more verbose. And he can't handle it. And he gave in and asked her. But he won't anymore, surely. He is packing his scrolls aimlessly, to appear busy more than to give any semblance of order to his messy room. He is embarrassed. Ashamed, even. And here she thought he was mocking her, it ended up being the other way around. Except she isn't laughing either. It was her mother who taught her. On pieces of paper she could scrape up and pens lifted from open pockets, with her complicated medical textbooks that she held onto like precious gems. Late at night, exhausted and weak, she told Karen to learn, while she could. He makes to take the scroll still in her hands. Her grip tightens reflexively because she is not laughing, and this is something she can do. This is something she can do. You're right. It does say downward too. Here. She grabs a brush and a blank piece of paper, she traces the right character carefully, with an arrow pointing down next to it. Upward would be like this, she adds, another character and another arrow, and she doesn't look up to see if he's listening or if he's ignoring her or glaring at her, if he wants her to leave. She doesn't dare. She writes another one instead. 5-point seal, 6-point seal. Centered, identical, symmetrical. Then there are the base seals, dog, boar, rat. He sits back down without a word as she keeps rambling and writing until she runs out of paper. She tacks them to the wall then, where she can find some space, before picking up the seal they barely started trying. So. Another 5-point seal. Downward too. He doesn't say a word, but he follows her instructions. Any progress? Kabuto asks. She lies. She is always watching him, and as such she is immediately aware of him disappearing without notice. She elects to keep it to herself. She can leverage it against him if he comes back, and if he doesn't, good riddance. She will get scolded, punished maybe, but at least he will be far from her sight. But he does come back. And he isn't alone. Karen, this is Gaara. Gaara, Karen. It's not just Gaara. It's the Jinhyuriki of Suna, snatched right out of his village by that Konoha idiot. He didn't ask anyone, he simply settled Gaara right next to him, as if he could just do that. Frustratingly enough, he can. The master isn't exactly pleased with that development, as it doesn't settle well with him to host not one but two-tailed beasts within his walls. He can't very well move against them nor underestimate them. The test in the Forest of Death proved that Oto is unlikely to withstand the full assault of a Biju, let alone two. But he is also delighted to see them deserting their village. It's not like he plans on attacking either, she believes he just takes pleasure in the ensuing chaos. Maybe he hopes for another war. All in all, Gaara is here to stay, and he's even less entertaining than Naruto is. He stays quiet and does a whole lot of nothing beyond trailing after Naruto everywhere he goes. Which was Karen's spot. Damn it, she's fucking jealous. Not even of the boy per se, but of what they have. They share a strange brand of intimacy that shows in their every move, an understanding she can't hope to share. They don't talk much, but they don't need to. They also spar with horrific violence, thanks to their fast recovery rate. Even Orochimaru's toughest fighters can't keep up. She had no place by Naruto's side before, and it's even less now. It's like family, Naruto says to her when she snaps and asks what is so special about that weirdo, why he matters so damn much. She can't help what comes out of her mouth next. What about me? She regrets it immediately. She flees the room before he can react in any way. She needs to go back to the southern hideout. She will feel better there, far from that boy that isn't part of her family. She doesn't need him, nor anyone else. She finds herself a quiet corner of the living quarters, to calm down and settle her nerves before going to the master. She can't let him know how affected she is, she can't hand him her weaknesses so easily. Yo, Karen. We need a fix. And if she goes back south, she'll avoid that too. She looks up to the three men effectively trapping her in the corner that seemed so welcoming a few minutes ago. She can't recall their name, she doesn't care. I'm busy, she deadpants, defiant. She blames Naruto for this too. He was friend with that pink-haired girl from Konoha, so she can totally lay the blame on him by proxy, though it's the girl's fault. Ever since the Chunin exam, ever since that girl rescued Karen for some bewildering reason, ever since that look on her face when Karen offered her a chakra fix as compensation. Ever since then, Karen has been remembering how much she actually hates to do that. How much she wants to scream and tear her skin off, and their skin too, when they approach her, when they take their teeth to her skin and suck the life out of her without any qualms. She had forgotten that she used to fight this, however useless it was. But it's her purpose here, isn't it? It's her value to her master, the only reason why he took her under his wing. It used to make it easier to bear, to see it that way, to know that this was how she could be useful, this was her sole value. But the girl had refused. She thought it was wrong. And Karen is stuck remembering that now. Damn, she hates those Konoha fuckers. Don't be difficult, Karen, the closest one says, patronizing. He tries to grab her arm. She punches his teeth out. A stupid move, as there are three of them and one of her, and she was never that good a fighter. In these situations she always regrets not trying harder, but still that doesn't push her to train more seriously. It's pointless berating herself now, as the second man closes a strong hand around her wrist, tight enough to hurt. He seems almost amused by her little display, like the indulgence shown at a child's tantrum. He knows she can't stop him even if she wanted to. And hell, but she wants to. He brings her arm to his mouth and she feels like throwing up. She wants to rage and fight, even if he would most likely break her arm if she did, because she hates this, hates it, hates their teeth sinking into her flesh, the marks that won't fade for days. But they have every right and she has none. She can't refuse them, it is the sole reason why she's even allowed to be here. She'd be best to remember that quickly. There is no escaping it. There never will be. She hears a weird noise. The man lets go of her wrist to grip at his crotch before falling to his knees. Behind him stands Naruto, looking pissed, and Gaara, looking as unconcerned as ever. The men quickly assess the situation. Naruto built himself a bit of a reputation these past few months. He likes to pick fights, and he often wins too, by sheer stamina. He sure has some aggression to work out. Karen isn't worth getting into a fight with him. The three men take off. Are you alright? Don't touch me. She can't stomach any more fingers on her skin. Surprisingly enough, he complies, though it seems to be hard for him, as his hands hover, aimless, above her bare arms. She remembers she had resolved to wear long sleeves more often, but it's not like she could go shop for new clothes that easily. You shouldn't have done that. You should have. If you didn't want them to touch you. Do you think that's up to me? He could do what he wanted because no one could oppose him. She has her purpose. She can deal with it. I don't want you to suffer, he says, helpless and nonsensical. As if it was about what he, or she, or any of them wanted. She ignores the warmth, the comfort. Stupid, stupid. That's nice. But that's not up to you either. What if it was? She frowns at him, puzzled. How? He seems hesitant then, for the first time since the beginning of that conversation. He just as easily slipped into righteous fury than he reverted back to his reserved, taciturn self. She can't decide which side is truer to his character. Maybe it's both in equal measures. You know. What you said, he mumbles awkwardly. What did I say? About family. Do you want to? She chokes on a dismissive retort, caught off guard. But she's not about to let him have the last word. We already are. What? We already are. Family. I was born in the Uzumaki clan. We're like cousins or something. She can't quite believe how easy she makes it sound when she's screaming in her own head, both revolted and exalted by her sudden breach. It's his turn to be taken aback. Take that. But she didn't expect him to look so happy. Really? He sounds almost odd. She blushes, feeling shy again. Oh, how she hates his guts. Yeah. Really. He doesn't question it, and he looks so pleased it hurts. She almost takes it back, tells him she lied, that it was an obvious joke and he fell for it like an idiot, because it's too much, it doesn't mean anything, she can't bear his feelings, on top of her own. His expression loses a bit of its shine though, getting shy again when he asks next, but do you want to? For a moment she wonders if he didn't understand what she just told him, until it hits her that she's the one who didn't get it. It's not sharing the name that would make them closer. He doesn't expect her to want to, maybe. It's a choice to make. And the answer isn't so easy. She knows what she wants, what she longs for, deep down, an ache that couldn't be soothed and wouldn't go away no matter how she wishes it to. She's mad at herself for not having grown accustomed to it after so many years, for craving still such a dangerous indulgence, companionship, safety, protection, love. It is childish and imprudent, in the world they live in their situation. She fears it will turn against her, she fears it will be harder after, when it inevitably fails and she's alone again. Some reached out to her before, even in this place, that gentle boy, Yugo, who shadowed Kimimaro, Gurren, on the rare times she was in Oto, and even Dosu and his group, because they too were stranded alone in this place. But she couldn't trust any of them to choose her before the love and fear they had for Orochimaru, who was both savior and persecutor to them all. She suffered the betrayal before. This time though. This time. We're cousins, I told you. You're stuck with me now. She means it as a threat, but he only laughs. Naruto somehow manages to strike up some friendships in Otogakure. Karen is so baffled by this development that for a while she's convinced it is some sort of strategy he's working on to gain support among the Sound Ninja or something. It quickly appears that Naruto isn't capable of such deceit though. He is just like that. The funniest thing is that he seems equally miffed by this. He doesn't realize that the basic attention and compassion he shows to those around him already place him leagues above their crowd. Most famously, he got rather close to Kimimaro, and Yugo, by extension, as those two come in pair. Naruto says Kimimaro reminds him of someone he knew. He says it with a painful kind of nostalgia, one that hints at a tragic fate for them. He is quite distressed by Kimimaro's poor health and how little can be done about it. For some strange reason, that seems to be Orochimaru's worst offense in his eyes, and not everything else. That is, until he stumbles upon one of the labs for the first time, until he meets Suijutsu, and then he storms into her room, furious, and asks why she never said anything about this. She is surprised Suijutsu mentioned her at all. They didn't know each other that well before. And she certainly never visited him in his prison. There has been a shift since then, one that she worries about. Naruto never acted like he felt in his place in Oto, but it was the same for all of them. They simply made do long enough that it did become the only home they could hope to have. She worried about his choices without ever wondering about hers. About what she would do, if he decided he couldn't stay here anymore. He still learns from their master, because it's also why he is here. Naruto's talent for sealing is natural but blunt, unrefined, and Orochimaru is all about refinement. She wonders if he truly hopes to seduce the boy into his service. He has to know it's not going to happen. Naruto has. For all his rage and resentment, he has this drive. He is fine with doing what it takes to survive and protect his friends, but he still doesn't like to hurt people. He doesn't seek power for himself, he's just not interested. What he truly wants, Orochimaru can't give him. Still Orochimaru teaches him because he is a teacher. Above all and despite everything, that is how she would describe him. He taught her a lot too, though not things she ever wanted to learn. She helped with the curse seal experiments. She doesn't sleep very well. Still, he teaches. Still, they learn. A little over a year after his arrival, Naruto disappears yet again, and again comes back with another stray. One from his very own village no less. One that Karen dislikes instantly. Hyuga Neji, of the Hyuga clan. The eyes are a dead giveaway and a huge liability. She curses Naruto for doing this behind her back. Had he told her, she could have warned him, because Kimimaro is getting worse. And Orochimaru can't set his sight on the Jinchuriki, as the Biju would most certainly object to any harm coming to their vessel. The Hyuga boy, however, is just too perfect a temptation for him. She knows what he will do to him. She saw it before. All in all, despite her limited usefulness, she is quite close to Orochimaru, because of her endless chakra reserves and her decent grasp at medical ninjutsu. Kabuto trained her in the art, when he could, and she imagines it is so that there would always be a medical expert available in Oto, even when he isn't there. She knows that Orochimaru's latest body is decaying, that he will soon need another one. She knows who he will choose. She says nothing. They will want to leave, and what will she do then? She can't. There is nothing out there for her, she couldn't escape this place even if she wanted to, and she's not sure she does. And Orochimaru. He saved her from a life as a slave that would have ended a long time ago. So what if he kills the Hyuga boy? It's not like she could stop him. It's barely a month after the boy arrived that Orochimaru asks her to fetch him. She obeys. She dodges the Hyuga's questions about what Orochimaru could possibly want with him. She leaves him on the doorstep of Orochimaru's lab, where Kabuto is waiting with an inscrutable expression but a discreet smirk, for her, when he shows Neji inside. She walks away. She goes to Naruto. She thinks about his chakra, so welcoming, so alike her own. Gaara's, colder and neutral, biting at times but somehow calming too, a steady anchor. Niji's even, its chiseled refinement and undeniable beauty despite how little she wants to approach it. Naruto would know, for sure. He would find out, one way or another, that she knew. And he would never forgive her. She keeps going back to his words, to him shy and blushing, asking if she wants to be part of that small, fragile thing they were trying to build with Gaara, between the two of them and with the Hyuga too now, something they never knew yet craved all the same, something that for some unfathomable reason, they were willing to include her in. She runs to him. Orochimaru is going to kill Niji, she says. It's all downhill from there. Chapter 7. It's Gaara who snatches Niji's wrist and tells him to run. Sand has already engulfed and overflowed most of the compound, the flood of Gaara's rage only receding to let them pass. Naruto is behind them and Niji wants to wait, but he's weakened alarmingly by whatever Orochimaru tried to do to him, and it's all he can do to keep stumbling behind Gaara. Soon, he can't even do that. His vision is blurring, he has never been so chakra deprived before, the life sucked out of him by the snake in just a few minutes. Had the others not burst in. Gaara catches him before he falls. It is not unfamiliar, they have been touching a lot lately, as though by chance, but it's too frequent and too deliberate, even if they have said nothing of it. Of all the things to come out of him running away, of trusting Naruto and deciding to follow him, this is surely the strangest and most unexpected. The scariest, but the most exciting too. He doesn't understand it, but just the idea that it exists, that it can grow and change, is exhilarating. But for that they need to get far away from here. Do not die, Gaara says. He cups Niji's face, so that their eyes can meet. His face never shows much, but the contrast in his eyes is the same as usual, serene peace and ablaze fury, and the sand is still raging around them, stained with blood, birthing and smothering cries of agony of the unfortunate caught in the tide. Gaara's hands are gentle on his face. I won't. There is no way. They've barely lived, they deserve more time, a lot of it, enough that it will outweigh all the time they lost already, trapped in their cage, alone. They hear a scream. At first Niji isn't even sure that's what it is, it doesn't sound human, this shriek of wrath and pain, but he recognizes the voice. What could Naruto have done to Orochimaru, to reap such a sound off of him? There is no time to wonder as the boy appears by their side, guided by the Hiraishin taped to Gaara's gourd so that Naruto can reach him at all times. He grabs them both, the jump is never pleasant, but Niji feels so terrible already that it barely registers. They pop out in the main training ground, then in one of the labs, where the sand makes quick work of freeing those imprisoned and where Naruto grabs that water boy he's been talking to. Niji thinks he sees Kimimaro too, but then they are at the main gate where Karen is waiting for them, and he and Yugo aren't here. Naruto doesn't let the girl get a word out that he is already moving them all, once, twice, thrice, until their surroundings are no longer recognizable. Niji falls to his knees as soon as they stop, on the verge of passing out. Karen is yelling above him, and he would tell her to shut up if he could make a sound. What happened? What did you do? What did you do? Naruto seems reluctant to answer, but it's best not to deny Karen, especially in that state. That seals works after all. It seems the better option to lose consciousness right there and then. Niji startled awake at the loud sound of the temple's main door sliding open forcefully. He winced, thinking of the repairs they would most likely have to do, again, and cursed whoever it was that couldn't open the door like a normal person. The list of suspects was limited. Gaara was already up, meditating in a corner of the room, unbothered by the commotion. Little could startle him. His fellow Jinhuriki in particular couldn't hope to get the drop on each other, as they were strangely attuned to each other's presence. "They're back," he stated in a low voice. His face barely changed, but he sounded pleased. They heard Karen yell, Suijutsu laugh, the other talking softly. Niji sighed, long-suffering, but he felt like smiling too. They are. In the main room they found Karen chasing Suijutsu around, while Naruto, as usual, did his best to look unaffected as Yujito ruffled his hair gently. Fu was mocking him, but she launched herself at him as soon as she could and hugged him viciously, so she didn't really have a leg to stand on. Niji often missed the tension wrapped around Gaara's body until after it was gone. He looked at the three hosts and the difference was so obvious it didn't make sense not to have seen it before. They were better at it now, but they still didn't like to be apart. Karen and Suijutsu's fight was mostly for show. It was how they demonstrated affection, and it gave the others a moment to greet each other. Niji waited a little before stepping in. "Hello, Niji," Yujito said, always mindful and polite to a fault, always with the faintest, softest smile that was as hard to decipher as Gaara's blank expression. She was the latest to have joined them, and she was several years older than them. He wondered if she felt out of place sometimes. She had confessed a sense of responsibility toward them, though she didn't see them as children. They were all shinobi, age didn't factor in their strengths and the dangers they could face. "What news then?" "You mean, aside from what happened in Suna?" Fu asked, cheeky, though there was true worry hidden underneath. Whatever they had heard on the way, it couldn't have been pleasant when they were so far away, out of reach and unable to help. "That could have gone better," Niji conceded, an understatement. With a look, Yujito agreed to let it go. She would get the story later. "We met with the hosts of the Yonbai and the Gobei," she said. "Really?" Naruto exclaimed, eager to tune back into the conversation. Niji rolled his eyes. It was the only thing he cared about. "Yes. We were right, they are both deserters, though it is kept on the down low by IWA. They were traveling together, they are good friends. They weren't interested in joining us, for now, but we warned them about the Akatsuki, and they took your seal. We will meet again." Naruto smiled, pleased, though he had to be a little disappointed their little group wouldn't gain any new faces for now. It made sense, as the two Jinhyuriki from IWA were much older, and probably well settled in whatever compromise they had struck with their village. "What about Kyumo?" Niji asked, never one to lose sight of the hard questions. Yujito's face lost some of its warmth, though she kept smiling at him. They didn't have the specifics, but her feelings toward her fellow Jinhyuriki were rather complicated. Killer Bee's status was unique among the lot of them, as he was recognized and well loved by his people, something that had always been hard to reconcile for Yujito, who wasn't related to the Raikage and thus wasn't so lucky. He wasn't interested. But he didn't report us, and he did give us some pointers regarding our relationships with the Biju. Killer Bee had no reason to want to leave the comfort and safety of his village, unlike Yujito, exploited, Fu, restrained, and Naruto, cast aside. "That's good," Naruto said. "We need to train." Niji had yet to leave Konoha when Naruto had started to make real strides in his link with the Kyuubi, so he wasn't clear on the details. Naruto didn't like to talk about it, but the two had come to an agreement of sort. Still, they all worried about losing control, about the power of the Biju unleashed onto the world. At the same time, even if Naruto had never spelled it in so many words, Niji was pretty sure his end goal was to free the Nine-Tail for good. How he would achieve that remained a mystery for now, one Niji didn't feel like thinking about. "We also confirmed that Orochimaru is working with the Akatsuki." Naruto's mood dampened significantly. "We found that out too. He doesn't seem to have any trouble finding bodies for his jutsu. We need to find a counter-strategy, and fast." I know. "And what about the seal?" "He doesn't want anything from us beside it." I know. "So we have to." "Yujito." She turned to Niji, surprised at the interruption. She was a great tactician, and she tended to get lost in the logistics. She often ended up talking to herself, as no one could follow her train of thoughts. It also meant she was lost to the effect of her words. In this case, Naruto looking more and more guilty by the second. "All in due time though," she amended, a little awkward. Niji held back a sigh. Karen had said something surely, for Naruto to feel so bad about it again. It was absurd. None of them were responsible for Orochimaru's greed and thirst for power. If anything, Naruto had done them a great service by incapacitating the man in some way, even if it meant he would turn to their enemy in retaliation. Niji wasn't about to feel bad about it, even if he could have taken the blame too. Yujito cornered him and Karen a few moments later. Once Fu had dragged Naruto outside for some sparring, she never ran out of energy, having arguably the best stamina of them all. Niji found her exhausting and didn't dismiss Karen's theory that she was always this fired up because she sucked the energy out of the people around her. Is he beating himself up over it again? Yujito asked. Niji glared at Karen. I didn't say anything, she protested. He brought it up himself. The animated corpses are a hard blow, and we wouldn't have to deal with it if we had left Oto peacefully. We can't even be sure about that. For all we know, Orochimaru would have tried to stop us all the same. But he wouldn't be out for Naruto's blood now. They hadn't heard directly from the man, since he couldn't find them, but they had had a few very unpleasant encounters with some of his people. Orochimaru was enraged. Enough that he would ally himself with the Akatsuki to track Naruto down. He needs to get it into his head that he is not responsible for this, Yujito stated, a tad angry. She had an inflexible sense of duty and justice, right and wrong, that Niji couldn't help but admire, impressed by her strength as much as her resilience despite the trials of her life as a Jinchuriki. I'll talk to him again, Karen assured, always eager to please the older woman. And we'll come up with that seal. Orochimaru will leave us alone. The rest, we can handle. It was probably a bit too optimistic of them, but what else could they do? The Akatsuki was a huge threat on its own, but at least there were very few of them. With Orochimaru's forces joining in, especially his corpses, the odds were much more dreadful. There was also no guarantee that he would actually back down once free of the seal Naruto had doomed him with, but for all his terrible traits, Orochimaru wasn't especially resentful. He was pragmatic above all, and couldn't be that thrilled to associate with the Akatsuki, whose contempt for he made no secret. There was an easier solution to this though. We should just kill him and be done with it. After all, it was more or less the beginning and end of their plan to deal with the Akatsuki. None of the members would be an easy target, but their group was 7 strong now, with 4 Jinchuriki. Their chances weren't so bad, including against the snake. Karen didn't agree. Don't be ridiculous, she retorted, in her usual, I'm not calling you stupid out loud but I'm sure you can hear it anyway, tone of voice. He wouldn't let it fly this time. How is that ridiculous? Orochimaru will still be a threat even if he is not personally after us anymore. We can take him out if we plan it carefully. What's the point in seeking him out? We are safe here. We don't need to engage. You had no qualm risking running into the Akatsuki on the way to Suna. We can't just hide here forever, we will have to fight them eventually. I know that. You just don't want him to die. She recoiled as if he had hit her, sputtering in indignation. But she didn't deny it. He had never leveled the accusation out loud, even if he was sure of it from the start. He didn't believe she regretted following them instead of staying in Oto, regretted her choice. But she would have rather they stayed. For all the venom she spewed about the man and the place, for all that she hated it there. He had seen it in a lot of them. It was baffling, but undeniable, despite how Orochimaru treated them and the life they led in Oto, they were grateful to him. Loved him, even. And she was no different. Yujito cast him a disapproving look, as if he was the one at fault for voicing the truth out loud, when Karen was the one still too attached to her former master to bear thinking about his death. A reluctance Orochimaru surely wouldn't repay toward her, or any of them. He had proven enough time how little he cared about the people under his orders. And yet, they stayed loyal to him, sought out his approval, obeyed his every wish, desperate that they were to give meaning to their existence by his side. Kimimaro had even chosen to stay, despite everything. Fuck you, she spat, voice tight. You can come at me when you're ready to slaughter your entire family. Is that what you consider your family then? You fucker and your rich clan in your nice little village have no right to pass judgment on that. That's enough. Yujito didn't raise her voice nor physically step in between them. She didn't have to. The warning in her tone was enough, and they both took a step back even if Niji wanted nothing more than to twist the knife deeper. Karen and he were too good at this, he hated that this was a trait they shared. They weren't going to start getting along now, but he had promised Naruto he would make the effort, so instead of pressing on, he walked away. You shouldn't have talked to her like that. Niji almost snapped back a scorching retort. He would have, had it been Naruto coming for him, or even Yujito. But it was Gaara. His voice carried no judgment nor acrimony. He simply stated a fact, and he was right. Anger abating, Niji realized that he shouldn't have, indeed. That didn't make it any easier to hear. I know. I'll apologize later. It wasn't their first fight and wouldn't be the last. She usually apologized too, albeit as reluctantly as he did. I don't understand her, he added after a while, since Gaara wasn't leaving, which meant he expected to hear more on the matter. I do. Really? If Orochimaru had been the one to take me away from Suna, I would have loved him too. Niji winced. Even knowing what kind of person he was. You are indebted to Naruto, because you took his offer to set you free. What would you have done, had he been a bad one? I would have refused. Gaara looked pained for just a moment, before his face softened. Maybe you would have. It nearly sounded accusing, but Niji wasn't sure of who. Morals don't matter much to abandoned children, Gaara added, almost as an afterthought. But that was the one Niji didn't have an answer to. Karen was evasive about her past, but she had arrived several years before them in Otagakure, alone. Who knew where she would be now, if not for him? That didn't change who the man was though, his many crimes, how bad he treated those people and her. She deserved better, yet she clung to it all the same. It was infuriating. He shook his head, there was no use dwelling on the matter. They would apologize and play nice, if only for Naruto's sake, up until their next fight. Did you need something else? He asked Gaara, who wasn't in the habit of lingering when he had said his piece. The boy marked a short pause, a world of hesitations, in his case. Fu said you were going to the river. Yes. You know she doesn't want to be alone on laundry duty, and I need to wash my hair. Gaara didn't add anything. He just stared, unblinking, as he did when he was waiting for someone to ask him what he wanted to say, so that he wouldn't have to speak first. Do you want to come help me? Yes. Niji had to smile. Karen bursts into his room, panting heavily, eyes shining. Orochimaru is going to kill Niji, she says. Naruto's first instinct is to lay a hand on the back of Gaara's neck before he explodes into a murderous rage. It works, if barely. Gaara doesn't get the urges much anymore, but his emotions are still brittle and easily overthrown, and he only has one response to any kind of emotional distress. Plus, he has grown very close to Niji. Some try to stop them as they rush to the labs. Those, Naruto cannot help. Anyone who gets into Gaara's way has to be ready to bear the consequences. Death, more often than not. Naruto gets more and more frantic as the commotion increases, as they are slowed down on their way, probably on Orochimaru's orders. What is going on? Why now? What is he planning to do, after all these months? Naruto gets his answer as soon as he reaches Orochimaru's private lab. He needs but a glance to identify the seal and its purpose. It is much alike the ones he has been studying for months now in hopes to learn more about what tied the Nine Tails to his body and mind. A soul-binding seal. Except this one goes even further. A soul to crush another soul. A soul to be bound to another body, and the host. He doesn't have time to think, to refine a plan and to foresee consequences. Kabuto is busy with Gaara, rather, busy with preventing Gaara from drowning them all. Naruto doesn't fear the sand. But he fears the lines painted around Niji's body and the grip Orochimaru has on him. He doesn't have time to think. He overwrites the seal. He throws his chakra into it. They fight for a while in the seal, there is no way to tell how long. Each to their will, pushing against the other, and Naruto draws deeper and deeper, chakra pouring out, disorganized and unfocused, but enough to hold his ground because this is the reason why the Uzumaki clan was always leagues above all others when it came to sealing. Orochimaru's precise refinement against the bluntness of Naruto's style, and he fears it won't be enough for a moment because Orochimaru's power is overwhelming, devastating in its intensity, and he starts to infiltrate Naruto's body too, turning the seal against him. That is his mistake though, as soon as his chakra creeps in, the fox roars. Oh, I don't think so. Naruto's body isn't for the taking. Orochimaru recoils at the onslaught and Naruto takes the opportunity to push back with all his might. He doesn't need to win, doesn't even need to put an end to it, he just needs to. It is only timing that makes it work. The seal keeps going, but Naruto manages to free the grip Orochimaru's soul has outside of his body, to box it back in just in time that when he realizes what is happening, it is too late. The seal closes, and so his soul is bound. But not to Niji's body. To his own, or is it? There is no way to tell. Whoever body it is that Orochimaru is living in, he will have to contend with it from now on, because the seal is locked and Naruto already knows, just looking at it, that he wouldn't be able to open it again even if he wanted to, and that anyone who tries will have a hard time too. Orochimaru screeches, hysterical. Naruto flees. Fu managed to drag them all down to the river with her. "Come on," she said, cheeky. "It will be fun." Naruto knew it was a big deal for her to have fun. She was tight-lipped about Taki, sidestepping the subject entirely, but she didn't need to talk about it for them to understand. It was in how she hated being alone, hated the silence, how she touched them and liked to be touched in return, how eager she was to meet new people and see new things. She had Gaara etch the kanji for joy on her shoulder. It wasn't hard to indulge her. So down to the river they went, just a short walk away from the temple. Suijutsu wasted no time diving in while Yujito helped Fu with the laundry. A bit apart, Gaara washed Niji's hair for him, his fascination for it never seemed to abate, and Niji pretended to only indulge for his sake, but he secretly loved it, Naruto was sure. It was nice, being cared for. They had found Fu during the Sunachunin exam. Or rather, right after, when she was on her way back, as they had heard Taki's Jinhiriki was among the party. She had sensed them before they did, had managed to sneak away, and had not bothered to look back once. As if she had been waiting for that her whole life. Maybe she had. Yujito, they had rescued by chance as she was being chased down by the Akatsuki in the outskirts of Kumo. Naruto had never been more grateful for the Hiraishin than on that day. He'd thought she would tire of them, and she had contemplated going back, for a while. But she'd elected to stay, when he had expressed his desire to find the others and to make something of it, of them together when they shouldn't have been, them walking out of their village, their place, their fate. It was 4 of them now. It would become more, maybe. But only if he could give them something to look forward to. For now, they were essentially outlaws on the run. They could defend themselves just fine, but they had to be careful not to be seen. They couldn't travel much. They couldn't go back to places they held dear and people that still had a place in their heart despite everything. They were still trapped, and Naruto hated it. There wasn't much to be done as long as the Akatsuki was a threat to them. It was frustrating how little they knew of the organization, their members, and their abilities, and most importantly, their goal. They had attacked Naruto in Konoha, Yujito in Kumo, and now they had gone after Gaara too. And for what? It was a mystery. Naruto had been tempted to straight up meet with them and ask, but had their goal not been nefarious, they would have taken that step first. Naruto remembered the forest. Kisame of Kiri and that mysterious orange mask. He remembered his hands covered in Shisui's blood. No, there were no allies to be found there. Orochimaru had been an ally. Not the most reliable one, for sure, but Karen was right. Had they wanted to leave, he would have let them. They had never been chained to Oto, not truly. His people stayed by his side because they didn't have another option, like Naruto when he had arrived, and Orochimaru would try to stop the most valuable of them from leaving, if it came to it, but he wasn't overly concerned with their wanderings. But then there was Suijutsu, and the cursed seal experiments, so maybe Naruto was entirely in the wrong about all this and it was always bound to end badly. Niji reproached Karen and him to be too lenient on the snake's character and intent, and he was in the right in some way. But Karen had reasons to be grateful to him, and so did Naruto. It was because of his offer that Naruto had been able to leave Konoha at all. What would he have done otherwise? Where would he have gone? They would have caught him in a matter of days, the village, or another or the Akatsuki. And Orochimaru did teach him. He really did, basics on sealing and chakra manipulation that he had only ever studied by himself before, or with his friends who were just as inexperienced as he was, just less inept. It was thanks to his teachings that Naruto managed to master the Hiraishin, that he could refine the bluntness of his techniques. That he could learn a little more about his origins, even if that maybe wasn't such a good thing. And that he could recognize what he was going to do to Niji that day, that he could counter it. Orochimaru probably regretted that bitterly now. And truth be told, Naruto regretted it too. Who cares about the snake? Naruto sighed. Leave me alone. Stop thinking so loud then. Why are you here anyway? Didn't you miss the others? Physical distance means nothing to us. Why then did they feel so uneasy when they were apart, and so relieved when they found each other again? The fox had settled down a great deal ever since Naruto had gotten closer to the other Biju. Not so much with Gaara, for the Nine and One-Tailed didn't get along so well, it seemed, but with Fu and Yujito. Especially now that they could visit each other at will. You have him to thank for that, you know? Naruto snarled at the fox, because he didn't like being reproached for his mixed emotions for his time in Oto. The tweaks Naruto had made to his seal were done under Orochimaru's guidance, though of course, as with all things, the snake had his own interests at heart, beyond Naruto's wish to pacify his relationship with his unwilling host. The man probably hoped that with more control, Naruto would gain more power, but also be more volatile, and rely on Orochimaru's ability to restrain, in some measure, the wrath of the Biju. The true goals of the man remained a mystery. Naruto had no doubt he wouldn't like them though. I have no gratitude to show for the expansion of my prison. Naruto knew that to be untrue. They shared their emotions in some measure after all, even if the demons were so different from his own, so much larger and deeper, barely comprehensible for Naruto's little human heart. Still, some were easier to grasp than others. Opening the seal was out of the question, of course. Even trying to loosen it just a little had proven disastrous. Naruto didn't want to think about it. There was no compromise to be had, the fox wanted to be free, that was all, and wouldn't willingly settle for anything less. Naruto couldn't very well fault them, since he was driven by the exact same urge. So it wasn't the bars of the cage Naruto had managed to shift, but the other side. The back of the prison that didn't lead to Naruto's body and mind, nor to their world. Naruto didn't know what it was, couldn't go there without crossing the gates. But the cage no longer had a bottom. Instead it led out, somewhere, and somehow, back to the other cages. To the other Biju. They couldn't pretend to know how it worked. Gaara and Naruto had worked on it in Oto as a compromise, once it became evident that doing the smallest change to the seal was out of the question. Orochimaru had been able to help with that for some inexplicable reason, even though he couldn't have met such a specific situation before. Or could he? He remained a mystery. Maybe he had met other Jinchuriki before. Maybe the souls of the bodies he took over still lived down there, trapped in the bottom of his mind. Later they had taught Fu and Yujito, so that the Biju could meet. Fu's Nanabi, Komei, was weirdly protective of her host, while Yujito's Nibi was mostly indifferent. The Kyuubi and the Ichibai were the most vindictive, with Gaara getting the worst of the lot for sure. At least the fox took a break from time to time. But little could offset Gaara these days, and the Biju was mellower as a result. It was still no solution. As long as they were all chained to each other, as long as they had this power, they wouldn't be able to live the life they wanted, they wouldn't be left alone. They couldn't go back. Fu spoke of a teacher sometimes. Yujito, of other women trained by her side, subjected to the same violence. Niji worried about his clan, half of it anyway, and Gaara had been affected by his encounter with his siblings. Karin wondered at her mother's family. And Naruto. Despite everything, there was always something, someone to miss, and it would always hurt, because the choice wasn't theirs, and so they couldn't make peace with it. Come on, stop moping. You're ruining the mood, Karin chastised, sitting down next to him on the riverbank. He wasn't a fan of water, although it didn't make him as skittish as it used to, as she had taught him, among many other things, how to swim. No one seems to mind. Fine, you're ruining my mood then. You can just sit somewhere else. He cringed at his harsh tone, but he couldn't do as she said. She sensed the shift, scooted closer. Are you still thinking about Orochimaru? Because you should stop. He's not worth it. She was always aggressive, even with her caring. Naruto found it funny, a little endearing even, that she couldn't bring herself to be gentle even if she tried. That's not it, he denied. He didn't think about Oto when they were all together like this. This brought on a different kind of regret, as he watched Gaara comb through Niji's long hair, that he tied high at the back of his head, his forehead carefully cleared, while Yujito chastised Suijutsu for splashing water on the sheets she and Fu had just wrung out, the boy sheepish but always weirdly pleased by the scolding. Ah. It's about your little friends, right? She was disdainful of Konoha and the people there he still thought about. She believed he was better off without them, but that was mostly due to her stubborn refusal to dwell on the past, to have any regret at all. Since he couldn't be with them anyway, she tried to convince him it was actually a good thing. It didn't work, but it was nice all the same. Because he didn't regret leaving. He didn't think it was a bad decision, he didn't wish he had made a different choice. He missed them all the same. Somehow more and more as time passed, which was absurd, shouldn't it have been the other way around? But in Oto it was easier not to think about it, as he was always on alert, aware of the hostility of the place, the precarity of their situation. Here they were much safer. He had more time to think. He didn't like it. I knew we wouldn't. But still. I hoped we could talk. They hadn't parted as enemies. They weren't supposed to be. But seeing the Konoha headbands in this setting, and Suna's too, it was a sharp reminder that if they didn't want to make an enemy out of their village had no such qualms. I just wanted to ask. How have you been? Are you alright? Did you miss me? Are you still mad? He shoved at her, annoyed. Don't mock me. I'm not. But they can't be your friends anymore. He knew that very well. Now the villages would know for sure, that they were still alive, still out there, regrouping, growing stronger. There was little chance they would ignore it, especially since it would spread through the shinobi world, both that Jinhuriki were up for the grab, and that some villages were now unprotected. It would make it more urgent for them to recover their tailed beasts, or acquire others. It would make it harder for them all to pretend they weren't on opposite sides of this story. Their face, when he had laid his seal. Gaara was right, he didn't have to do it that way. Was it a coward's move on his part? He just couldn't afford for them to give chase. We're far from done, Karen added, almost threatening. As if he would refute that. He knew what he had to do. She lacked the empathy to comfort him, she who decided never to miss anyone. Sometimes he wanted to tease her about missing him if he were gone, but she would have punched him and he didn't want her to be upset. She sighed, realizing she needed to say more since she had committed herself to bother him about his sullen mood. You'll ask once we are. They'll still be there. You'll ask, did you miss me? I bet they'll say no. Naruto chuckled. Sakura, for sure. But Sasuke, who was terrible, would probably say yes, all earnest and serious. Naruto could almost picture it. And he would say, I missed you too, and mean it, and maybe he would smile, and he would forgive him. Maybe they wouldn't have to miss each other again. Akiko slithered into existence next to him, bright white against the tall grass. She went to wrap around his shoulders. The red cloud is on the move. Maybe one day. Chapter 8. This part was always strange, when the mission was done and they had to go home, but it had rarely been with such a heavy weight on their mind. Even Lee was unable to lift their spirits as they made their way out of the desert and back into the lush forests of the Land of Fire. They remained silent and forlorn, lost in their own thoughts. Sakura avoided Sasuke and he didn't try to breach the gap. She was angry, he knew, at how things had turned out, at the Akatsuki, at herself, at Naruto of course. For her, it was often anger. It was a good thing, easier than to see her set and defeated. It was also why she was avoiding him. She was never that good at dealing with his sadness. Sasuke stopped just as they were about to cross the gate. The others went on, but he got stuck a step away from the line, the demarcation that separated Konoha from the outside world, the limit to their village. For the past 2 years, every time he went out, every time he walked over the line, he would spare a moment to the same fleeting thought. Maybe when I come back, Naruto will be with me. It wasn't any real wish, he didn't expect to stumble upon his friend by accident. And yet, the thought would cross his mind, there and gone, and would come back as he did, as the gates came into view and as he went back home, once more, on his own. They had left Konoha in quite the rush this time, yet the thought had lingered longer. For the very first time, he had cause for hope. Going after Gaara was the closest he would come to Naruto, he was sure of it. The same foolish hope, every time. Maybe this time would be the one. Maybe they would cross paths with Naruto. It was absurd that his wish never got past that. They would cross paths. Then what? What did he think would happen? Naruto had left for a reason and there was a reason why he didn't come back. Was seeing Sasuke again supposed to change that? Maybe he had hoped it would. The disappointment was a sharp and bitter weight on his tongue, heavy on the nape of his neck. He had a hard time wrapping his head around the idea that this was it. This was all their first encounter after more than 2 years would turn out to be. They barely exchanged a word. They barely exchanged a look. Sasuke hadn't realized until now how soothed he would have been by Naruto suffering the distance like he had. Was it wrong of him to wish his friend was missing him too? Sasuke looked down at the line. In, out. The village and the rest of the world. And for the first time, he forced himself to acknowledge the possibility that he would never again step over this line with Naruto by his side. He wasn't one to doubt. All these months, he had managed to put it aside and focus on his study and training because he was confident that time wouldn't affect them. That whenever they managed to finally meet again, it would be enough. After all, they had not parted as enemies, right? Naruto had not said he was leaving forever. He had not said he didn't want to see Sasuke again. But, Sasuke supposed a lot could change in 2 years. The circumstances were far from ideal, and Naruto was right to be wary of where they stood. Not as friends, but as a shinobi of Konoha and a deserter from that very same place. Even now, Sasuke wasn't sure what he expected, how he thought this would go. And how he thought others would react as well. He had not asked Kakashi, had not dared, aware somehow that he wouldn't like the answer. Did the man receive his orders, without Sakura and Sasuke knowing? Was there a contingency plan for Naruto, now that they were sure he was out there doing his own things, gathering his own group? Really, it was Sasuke's mistake, for failing to foresee any of it. But why the seal? It didn't hurt, he couldn't feel a thing. Yet he found himself rubbing at his chest as if he could. Sakura did the same, though she caught herself quicker than he did. They hadn't talked either. She was angry, and Sasuke was in no state to comfort her. Naruto could have threatened them in any number of ways. He could have just trusted. Didn't Sasuke let him go once? He could do it again. And again, if he had to, no matter how much it hurt. So why? Even at the height of their fight in the Valley of the End, Sasuke had never once entertained the possibility that Naruto might really try to kill him. A lot could change in 2 years. Was that it? Whatever Naruto had found out there, it had changed his perspective enough that he was ready to go that far to ensure they stayed out of his way. That he could change that much, Sasuke could wrap his head around it, but not that Naruto could assume the same from him. How could Naruto have grown to distrust him so? To see him as an enemy? Naruto didn't care anymore. He didn't care at all. He was ready to fight them for a way out. To kill them, maybe. Was that where they stood now? His heart hurt. "We'll go report immediately, then you'll be free to go," Guy said. He had taken the lead of the group, Kakashi still out of it and shaken enough that he was in no position to do so. Right, they had to report to the Godame. So much had happened, so many threats had arisen. The Akatsuki, the reanimated corpses. Naruto and his friends. Gaara, others like them. Neji too. Sasuke felt like a fool. He didn't know if it was on him, if he should have known better, if he had missed something. But no. He had no reason to expect something like this from his friend, right? He couldn't have seen it coming. It wasn't normal, wasn't right. Or was it? Would others be surprised, or not? Would Tsunade just shrug, nonplussed? Was he the naive one? They went to the Hokage Tower. Tsunade was waiting, having been warned of their arrival no doubt. They had sent a preliminary report already, as they left Suna, so that she got the news as soon as possible. If only the hard facts, the Kazekage was dead, Suna's Jinhiriki still on the loose and confirmed to be colluding with Konoha's, the Akatsuki going after them and the huge threat they posed. That first report said nothing of the turmoil, the confrontation in the forest, of Naruto's determined face. How cold, how distant. Sasuke would have rather they didn't meet at all. You have that corpse sealed? Tsunade asked Kakashi. He nodded, handed her the body seal containing the reanimated corpse that had attacked him. A Jounin from Konoha, who had been dead for years. Sasuke felt like he should have felt more concerned and alarmed by this, but there was too much going on in his head. He would think about that later. He tuned back into the conversation when Tsunade slammed a heavy hand on his shoulder, his knees nearly buckling under the sudden pressure. Are you all right, Sasuke? He looked around him briefly, the others were gone. This part was even stranger, when they had to split up after a mission, to go home or to the hospital, or when they took the same way to have a drink, unwilling or unable to let go just yet. Lee and Tenten had gone home, to the small flat they shared near the training grounds. They were each other's family, they would know how to comfort each other. Sakura didn't wait for him, and he didn't expect her to. They weren't so good at comforting each other, as they both needed it, as they shared the same pain and dealt with it in very different ways. She would go to Ino, would probably crush a few trees with her sword or just rant and rage well into the night. He didn't have to worry about her, she would be in good care. They would meet when the wave had passed for them both. I'm fine. I'll go back to the hospital, if that's all. Oh no. No way. You boy are going home right now. She didn't let him open his mouth to protest. I don't want to hear it. I'll tell the staff not to let you in until tomorrow morning. Go rest, get drunk. Wait, how old are you again? Whatever. Go to your family, or your friends. I don't know, cry. She wasn't good at comfort either. But it made him smile anyway, however faintly. They weren't close in that sense, he never confided in her and she didn't share anything about her either, yet she always seemed to know. He supposed it came from experience, she could tell what was bothering him and why, be it about his father, his brother, his missing friend. She was never dismissive of it, which was why he appreciated her clumsy care. Unlike most of the adults around him, she seemed to believe his emotions were worth having, however mundane. It was a nice feeling. Okay. I'll go. But I won't cry. He didn't know why he said that. He sounded petulant, and, to his horror, not that convincing. She just waved him away, mind already moving to the next task at hand. If he couldn't sleep tonight, he would come back and help her sort through paperwork or just waste the darkest hours away with her. She didn't sleep much. At least he could keep her company. His mother when she was upset would focus all her attention on caring about others. She said he took after her in that regard. He didn't know if she saw it as a good or a bad thing. Oh, one last thing, Sasuke. Your father wants to speak with you. About what? I'll leave the explaining to him. Sasuke didn't like the sound of that, but she turned away from him, clearly done with the conversation. He went to the grocery store, just to be contradictory, and because Shikamaru had complained about them running low on the strange balls of flavored sugar he used to sweeten his coffee. Sasuke piled on a few more things the other boy would like and pointedly didn't think about his mother. He was tempted to go to her, to rest his head on the kitchen table while she cooked and let himself be infused with the warmth, but he wasn't up to run into his father just yet. The man wouldn't go as far as saying something like, "I told you so," but Sasuke would be able to hear it anyway, to see it on his face. He was glad he didn't live at his parents' home anymore. The rash, somewhat unreasonable decision to get his own place, that he had made on the heat of a bitter argument with his father, had turned out to be a blessing in many ways. Away from his father's prying eyes, he didn't have to suffer his scrutiny and judgment, and his father was willing to keep the peace when Sasuke was visiting, if only for his wife's sake. His father had been among the ones pushing for a more active search into Naruto's whereabouts, one of the rare times he and Hyuga Hisashi agreed. Before the second became irrelevant, and the Uchiha focused back on tracking the rogue Sharingan user still on the loose somewhere in this world. Sasuke wondered how Hinata was doing these days. So much had happened, in only 2 years. Sasuke was greeted by Jiji in front of his building, who climbed up his clothes to settle on his shoulder. The black cat was technically a summon, though he loathed being called enough to ignore it most of the time, and Sasuke didn't know if he couldn't talk or just didn't deign to. But he rubbed his head all over Sasuke's face and the grip on Sasuke's heart loosened just a tad. Sasuke grabbed at his shirt, in the center of his chest. Tsunade would need further tests, but she had confirmed there was indeed a seal newly wrapped around Sasuke and Sakura's heart. He didn't want to think about it. He climbed the stairs up to the 5th and last floor. The door wasn't locked when he arrived home, and the flat wasn't quiet. 4 pairs of eyes looked up at him from around the coffee table, just long enough to greet him before Koji, Kiba, and Shino went back to their card game. Shikamaru kept staring though, as he wasn't part of the game, and was annoying too. "I take it didn't go too well," he said casually, pretending he could read Sasuke's mood when he had probably just heard it from the Hokage's office and Ino's hot gossip channels. Granted, Sasuke's mood couldn't be that hard to assess at the moment, even for Nara Shogi is easy people are hard, Shikamaru. Sasuke didn't answer. He went to sit on the couch, as far from Shikamaru as possible, and ignored him long enough that his friend tuned back into the game with a sigh. He didn't play, but he gave pointless commentaries and unhelpful advice to all, his way of engaging. Kiba protested loudly while Shino, much like Sasuke, ignored him entirely. Koji was just amused. The party ended with Kiba's resounding defeat. He gathered the cards to shuffle them before the next round. "We ran into Naruto," Sasuke said into the lull of their chatter. Kiba kept shuffling. "We heard," he answered into his cards, casual as could be. Sasuke had to wonder if that was the reason why they were here. They gathered at the flat often enough, as Sasuke and Shikamaru were the only ones not still living under their parents' roof, but it couldn't be as often as they wanted, what with their missions, training, and clan duty. Had he had a choice, he would have rather they didn't come, so that he could mope in peace, face down on his bed. That was probably the exact reason why they had come. "Better luck next time," Kiba said awkwardly, before he started dealing the cards with an expert hand. Sasuke settled deeper into the couch and let their joyful banter replace his own muddled thoughts. "Last one?" Kiba asked. "Winner takes all?" "All what?" Koji asked, mocking. "All the cookies your mother made for us but that you didn't take out of your bag hoping we wouldn't notice." Koji had the gale to sound offended. "I made them myself." "Is that supposed to be better?" They had a loose policy on snacks and drinks providing for this sort of situation, but between Koji hoarding food, Kiba hoarding money and Shino being unconcerned by both, it often ended in raiding the flat's cupboards anyway. It felt strange sometimes, to think about this. Their friendship, their bonds, the time they spent together, how well they knew each other. Sasuke had no friends growing up, besides the children his age in the Uchiha clan that he had to hang out with more out of obligations than anything else. Naruto was the first friend he made on his own. But Naruto wasn't there anymore. They left after Shino won the last round, as expected. He insisted Koji leaves his cookies at the flat, as repayment for their friend's hospitality. Koji's mournful eyes at the box were mostly for show, he would be back the next day anyway. Sasuke only waved from the couch, feeling a little bad at his poor manners but unable to find it in him to see them to the door. Shino laid a hand on his shoulder, just before turning away. "Do not give up," he said, face and tone as inscrutable as ever, hidden by his collar and glasses. Sasuke nodded, grateful. But it was easier said than done. He didn't move as Shikamaru closed the door on their friends and went to start dinner. He rummaged through Sasuke's groceries himself, making non-committal noises at his findings. Sometimes later, he put 2 steaming bowls of ramen on the coffee table. "Ramen? Really? Bury your brooding face in your bowl so that I don't see it anymore." It also required for Sasuke to sit up more or less properly, as he wouldn't risk lifting the bowl filled to the brim. It was instant, of course, but Shikamaru had made the effort to throw in an egg and some cut-up vegetables. Sasuke must have spaced out longer than he thought. Ramen, soba, okonomiyaki. The endless debate among Team 7, when it was time to decide where they would go to eat. Endless in theory anyway, in practice, it was ramen more often than not. Not because Naruto was any good at arguing his point beside repeating ramen 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 over and over like a nuisance, but because the Ichiraku shop was the only place, and they had tested many, all of them really, where it wouldn't end up with Naruto closing up like a clam at the unspoken hostility. Or storming off at the spoken one. Sasuke didn't like to go anymore, but the old man still asked, when he saw him. "Aren't your friends with you?" "No, they weren't." "I'm sorry," Shikamaru said after a few minutes of silent slurping. "For what?" "Geez, I don't know. It's just a thing people say, you know." Sasuke snorted. He spilled some broth. He felt like crying, just a little. "I'm sorry it didn't go the way you hoped." Or something. It was Shikamaru's turn to hide in his bowl. "I think I should focus on something else," Sasuke said. "For now." And it wasn't like he hadn't. He had not spent much time looking for Naruto those past few years. It was only when the circumstances allowed it, an adjacent of some missions and trips, and steady harassment of Ino for any news. Yet he had, in a way. It had stayed huge and alive in his mind, never quiet, never still. He had been waiting, even at his busiest, even when he had no thought to spare, he was waiting still. And now he couldn't remember what he had been waiting for exactly. Naruto surely wasn't waiting for him. "Your father wants to see you," Shikamaru said, and there was no telling why he thought that was a good change of subject. "Do you know why?" "He wants you to accompany him. Some diplomacy visit, I think." "Your brother is coming too." Sasuke did his best to be polite and amiable to his father, for his mother's sake, but their relationship was still more than strained. It wouldn't be so bad if his father had agreed to talk, properly, calmly, after the initial fight, after he had admitted to almost taking the Uchiha clan to a coup and Sasuke had almost broken their house's door on his way out. But there was no broaching the subject without it devolving into a shouting match, and so the solution was to ignore it entirely. It worked out fine, mostly. Except that Sasuke was physically incapable of talking about anything else with him. It just wouldn't come out. He needed so badly to hash out that one matter, no other could have its place between them. And so, they were cordial. But they didn't talk. Itachi had received some of the fallout since he was in the known and never deemed wise to bring Sasuke up to date, but it was easier to let it go for the simple reason that Sasuke was far better at fighting with his father than with his brother. He didn't want to be mad at Itachi, so he wasn't. He quite wanted to be mad at his father, so he was. His mother understood this, of course she did, so she had soon ceased her attempts at pleading his cause, though she had answered Sasuke's questions and acknowledged his outrage. She seemed deeply regretful of the whole matter, sorrowful even, which led Sasuke to suspect that there was still more to it that he didn't know. "Have you ever considered it was better for you not to know?" she had asked once. "Better for who?" he had retorted. She had no answer to that. And yet, despite everything, Sasuke still craved so badly for his father to recognize him as relevant and mature enough for him to share his thoughts, for them to talk on equal footing, if not in rank or status then in the validity of their opinions and feelings. He also was in dire need of a distraction, and what better than a long fight with his father for that? Sounds fun. Not as fun as mine. You got a mission. Akatsuki hunting. I was assigned to Asuma's platoon. Or more like, requisitioned. I'm leaving tomorrow. Sasuke had hoped they could have a few days off to laze around on the couch and commiserate about their lives, but the Akatsuki was a huge threat, one that Tsunade took very seriously. If he chose not to go with his father, Sasuke would probably be sent out with the task force too. "Which medic are you taking with you?" "Marco." Could have been worse, but could have been better too. Marco was the most knowledgeable of them all, and very skilled in theory, but he was still squeamish in practical situations, and his social skills were abysmal. Well, as long as he wasn't required to make conversation and to put some guts back into place, they would be fine. One medic per team for sensitive missions was mandatory now that they had enough trained medic to spare a few without running the hospital into the ground. Every shinobi was also required to learn the basics of medical ninjutsu, just in case. Sasuke had run classes for his father and the other senior members of the Uchiha clan. It was quite the memory. "You'll be careful," Are you worried? Sasuke grimaced at the jab, but he was indeed worried. He kept thinking about Sasori, about how close a call it had been despite the old woman's presence. Sasuke had come out of it relatively unscathed, but it had cost the woman her life and without Lee's arrival. And the Akatsuki seemed to travel by pairs. They weren't to be taken lightly. I'll be careful, Shikamaru amended, sensing the shift in mood. Do you want to run me through your fight? He really didn't want to think about it anymore. No, it's fine. I'll study for a bit. That would be easier. No complicated feelings, no doubting about the future. He settled on the couch with a scroll on post-traumatic stress disorder. Tsunade had been not so subtly orienting him toward psychology and psychiatry lately, no doubt the most underdeveloped of their field of study. She said that with how mentalities were progressing in the village, it would mature to an actual subject of global concern by the time he was her age. Shikamaru sat at the other end of the couch with a book, one of those stupid erotic romances Kakashi was so fond of. You don't have to keep me company, Sasuke commented weakly. He was desperate to not talk about any of it, and he was also desperate not to be alone. He couldn't voice either desire. Don't flatter yourself, Shikamaru shot back before opening his book and proceeding to ignore his flatmate altogether. Sasuke's despair was soothed by a wave of affection and gratitude for his friend, and it was easier to breathe and swallow back traitorous tears after that. Just for tonight, he figured he was allowed to just not think about anything at all. What do you think? Tsunade pulled her hands out of the insides of the corpse. They had managed to sedate enough what remained of Uzuki Miyako that she almost looked as dead as she was supposed to, but the wards had to be remade constantly lest she'd try to escape. For now Tsunade had no idea how to make her death permanent again. It has to be his work, she said, pulling off her gloves. Even with all the hypocrisy I could muster, and that's a lot, I can't draw another conclusion. Jiraiya's frown deepened, though it couldn't come as a surprise. As soon as Tsunade had gotten Kakashi's report, about old teammates of his father up and about and making his life difficult on their way out of Suna, she had been unable to even formulate another hypothesis. Who else could, and would, do such a thing? Who else would be talented enough, bold enough, and amoral enough? Orochimaru was always so good at everything. He had always been obsessed with life and death, with prolonging one and banishing the other. His experiments were already off-putting and controversial when they were barely in their Jounin uniforms. War had both stopped his endeavors and encouraged them. He didn't have as much time to study, but suddenly coming by shinobi corpses full of ninjutsu and secrets was the easiest thing in the world. And back then the village even had a vetoed interest in his discoveries, so who would have stopped at the decency of it all? Plus, the fact that it was shinobi from Konoha, specifically from their generation or just below, that it was Sakumo's old friends of all people to go against Sakumo's son. That just reeked of Orochimaru's twisted sense of irony. His very own brand of cruelty. She had sent people to check the civilian cemetery, but she already knew what they would report. It's a line he was bound to cross eventually, Jiraiya said grimly. Regretful. She wondered if there was truly a point where they would finally manage to turn on him for good. Even now, Yaya had to be thinking, this is it, this is the one I can't excuse. But was it? How many times had they had that exact thought? Only for the boundaries to be pushed yet again, shifting further and further away, and always they took the extra step, to stay right behind it, because they couldn't let go. It was the sad, naked truth. They just couldn't. We need to find a way to neutralize them, she said. Talking shop was easier, they didn't talk about their feelings for their friend and each other. What would be the point? They knew already. They were too old for denial. I'll get on it. What about Naruto? Her glare didn't deter him, but he did take on an apologetic expression. I'm just asking. She sighed. She would have to answer to it soon enough anyway, to the head Jounin and the clan leaders at least. It's best to consider him lost to us. For now. If we keep pressing on, he will go from deserter to enemy. If it wasn't the case already. She didn't believe him to be vindictive enough to seek out revenge or retribution, but he wouldn't be bullied around either. She was impressed with his determination. Impressed, and greatly saddened. Ask Sakura. He put a seal on them. You should check it. It was hard to believe Naruto would do such a thing to his friends, would threaten their lives in such a blunt, tangible way. But what did she know? Maybe his resentment was that strong after all. Can't you? The man whined. She won't be happy about it. Who's the seal expert here? Besides, she's your student. No matter how little you got along, you were together for 2 years. She's still yours to look after. She wasn't sure why she was so adamant. Maybe because she was let down so thoroughly by her own mentors, one after the other? All right. Tsunade checked the wards and pulled the sheets back over Miyako's body. They hadn't contacted her remaining family. It seemed pointless, seeing how she couldn't speak nor did she seem to understand or recognize them. She was 10 years buried. Tsunade shuddered at the thought. If they couldn't even trust the dead would stay this way, how was she supposed to sleep at night? She was haunted enough already by those who were gone, she didn't need to run into them in broad daylight as well. Do you know who will take Raza's place? Sage, there was that too. She didn't know how stable Suna was these days, didn't know if the succession would bring on more conflicts. She was so tired. Let's go for a drink, she said as an answer. Jiraiya followed readily. Sasuke meant to go see his father, he did. At first he planned to go to the police headquarters early in the morning before the man was too busy, but then he figured lunch break would be better since his father wouldn't appreciate wasting working time for any reason. The appeal of going to the headquarters instead of home was that they were less likely to lose their temper with an audience, but he wasn't that confident in that statement, and he decided lunch would probably be too awkward. His father often skipped it anyway. So he resolved to go in the afternoon, but then he became worried that his father would be out and he would be left to wait awkwardly for him to come back. It made more sense to go home after all, though there was no way to know what time his father would be back and if anyone would be there at all. Itaka would be at the hospital, their mother with her genin team. That left dinner, but they had ruined enough family meals with their arguing for Sasuke to feel guilty about it, so it was best to have that kind of talk away from the kitchen table. In the end Sasuke didn't even make it to the Uchiha district, turning back in front of the gates when he decided he would just go tomorrow for sure. His steps faltered when he passed by Shisui's house though. He stayed standing there for a while, undecisive. What was it with him and making decisions today? He obviously didn't dread meeting Shisui like he did his father. But Shisui would ask about Naruto. You can come in. Shisui's home. Sasuke didn't startle before he spun around to come face to face with the blank, judging stare of Hyuga Takuma. It was impressive, this clan's capacity for looking disdainful without doing anything at all. Maybe it was the eyes, Sasuke had come to know Takuma well enough and knew the man wasn't so bad. It was still unpleasant, the weight of his gaze. Cool. He followed the Hyuga inside. Shisui was grading tests at the kitchen table. What was supposed to be a temporary position at the academy before he moved on to become a Jounin instructor had become far more permanent, when Takuma decided, and was able to, stay with him as a teacher and they could get on with making the changes they wanted to the school. It wasn't to everyone's liking, but they had Tsunade's support, as she enjoyed far too much the looks on the older staff face when they came to complain about those young ignorants and their dangerous ideas. She was also very fond of children in any case, but that she wouldn't admit so easily. Welcome back. Oh, hello Sasuke. Welcome back too, Shisui greeted warmly. I found him outside, Takuma said, because he had to embarrass Sasuke further. I'll leave you to it. Are you sure? They exchanged a look. Sasuke resisted the urge to clear his throat or something. Why? Don't you want to ask him something? At least all were equal before Shisui's truly terrible habit of putting them on the spot and forcing them to talk about their feelings and all. They had lived together for a year, so Takuma ought to be used to it, but as a member of the Hyuga clan, he had started with a handicap, so he was still helpless to it. As it was, they stared until the Hyuga relented. He turned back to Sasuke, but he didn't meet his gaze, looking at some wood pattern on the wall instead. You saw Niji, he stated. He finally deigned to meet Sasuke's eyes when the silence stretched long enough to be uncomfortable, and Sasuke understood he wasn't going to say another word. He kept an eye roll to himself, barely. He seemed fine. He was with Naruto. They both looked okay. Takuma closed his eyes, only briefly, in relief, in pain. He gave a short nod and disappeared into the backyard. I could just have told you so you'd tell him later, Sasuke said as he sat across Shisui at the table. His awful cousin just chuckled. And where would be the fun in that? He can't go through life only talking to me. I'm trying to ease him into it. He smiled fondly at his paper. Sasuke didn't dare ask if there was something there, something more than Shisui offering hospitality and support to a mere friend. It would have been borderline scandalous just a few years back, and indeed, just them being close had stirred some comments back then. But the Hyuga clan was very different now, and truth be told, the Uchiha clan was too. Such a relationship was still unheard of, as the two clans didn't mingle, but it wouldn't be as frowned upon as it once could have been. Not that it would have stopped either of them, Sasuke thought. He had heard from some gossips at the hospital that Izumi was maybe going out with one of Ino's cousins. Even Itachi was being weirdly courted by his friend from the tea shop, though it was hard to tell if he reciprocated in any way. He also had some strange form of flirting going on with Marco, maybe it was just that Itachi was awkward with everyone period. Ino had gone on a few dates, Kiba too, the wildest rumor said with each other, but no one had dared ask them directly. And Sasuke's mother asked, from time to time, albeit not that much, maybe because of the face he made when she did. What about you? Are you seeing anyone? He didn't know why he was so surprised by this development, but it was a subject that had never concerned him in any way. When they were kids and a lot of girls chased him around, trying to offer him gifts or get him to agree to a date, he couldn't feel anything but annoyance toward the whole matter, and when that had stopped, he had put it out of his mind, never to be revisited. There just wasn't anyone he could think about in that way. His mother had asked about Sakura and Ino, but it was unthinkable for both. They were good friends, close friends, but he felt no attraction to either. The idea of dating anyone made him vaguely uncomfortable, like it wasn't for him, only others. Though picturing it for others was weird too. Hence why he didn't ask. He didn't really care about knowing. And he didn't want the questions to be returned. What happened then? Huh? You saw Naruto? Sasuke frowned. That was why he hesitated to come here. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what Shisui wanted to hear. Didn't want to disappoint him. Didn't you read the report? I did. Why do you ask then? I figured you might want to talk about it. He did. Shisui was good like that. Half his students were convinced he was psychic. It had started a wild rumor that the Sharingan granted mind-reading abilities to its users, something that Sasuke's father was not amused by at all and that Izumi found hilarious. She had used it to prank some Chunin under her supervision. The clan leader was not pleased, but she was strangely impervious to his authority. It just slid over her. Sasuke envied her confidence. Don't you have doubts? He needed to ask. He needed to know if he was alone in this, if he was in the wrong. He couldn't ask anyone else, they wouldn't understand, or would understand too well, and he couldn't be influenced by their thoughts on the matter. Shisui was different. He was often right. I choose not to. How? I thought it would be easy. But then he looked so cold. And he used that seal. It wasn't unreasonable of him to be hurt, was it? They all knew what this seal could do. I'm sure he had his reasons. How can you know? Sasuke. I said I wouldn't doubt, so I won't. His tone was a bit harsh, but he softened immediately. It doesn't cost me anything to trust him. I am staying here, I'm waiting. What if you had to chase him down? What then? You don't have to wonder about that right now. You think you need to make a choice now, but you don't. For now what he does is of no concern to you, or us. He is not your responsibility, not your burden to bear. Do you understand? Naruto is not here, Sasuke. He is not with you. Didn't he know that all too well? Yet he couldn't help but think about him. Couldn't help but feel like he could have done differently, done better, and they wouldn't be where they were now. It was absurd and maybe even pretentious of him, Naruto wouldn't appreciate this line of thought. He had made his choice, built along the years long before Sasuke could hope to have an impact on his life, and even then. Naruto had asked, "Do you ought to be reason enough for me to stay?" And Sasuke knew the answer, yet selfishly, he still wanted to say yes. "Will you go with your father then?" "I guess. I'm not sure." "Why?" "It's a good opportunity." He doubted his father cared about Sasuke gaining political knowledge. Or if he did, it was because he still clung to the idea of seeing either him or Itachi succeed him as head of the Uchiha clan. Why else would he suddenly be adamant they both went out on a diplomatic mission with him? He still didn't think much of Sasuke's ambition. And for the first time in a very long time, Sasuke didn't think much of it either. Does anyone care if things change, or not? Maybe Naruto would never come back anyway. Was there a point then? Should he bother? No one seemed to think some things needed to change. Well, that wasn't true. Ino had some ideas. Tenten too, and Kiba and even Koji, and it had become something of a joke between them. "When you're Hokage, Sasuke, we can." They laughed, but they were serious too. "Maybe. If you think to improve things only for Naruto's sake, then I guess it would be best you gave up indeed." There was a hint of anger in Shisui's voice and Sasuke scrambled to find an answer. He didn't mean it that way, it was just. He had this plan. If I do this, and this, if I do everything perfectly, if everything works out, then he will come back. And now he had to consider that it wouldn't work. That no matter what he did, it wouldn't change a thing. "I should go," he announced, getting up in an unpleasant rattle of the chair against the floorboard. Shisui got up too, a little apologetic. "I'm sorry, I know you're frustrated. I didn't mean. It's fine. I shouldn't have brought it up." He regretted opening his mouth, showing this side of him to Shisui, who had talked too, at times, about what he would want to ask of Sasuke when he stood at their head. How disappointed would they be if he gave up on this? Were his ambitions so shallow? Maybe his father was right. It was only children's fantasy. Maybe he wasn't strong enough for his goals if it took so little to make him question everything. "I'll see you later." "Sasuke, come on." He fled the house. His mother didn't ask how he was or how it had gone. It raised the question of how fast words traveled among the shinobi, including words that didn't have any business traveling, but he was glad for the leaks for once, because he would have hated having to explain it to her with words of his own. As it stood, she didn't need to ask and she didn't, she just drew him into a hug, strong and firm, compassionate. He leaned into it for quite some time. They were almost the same height now, and he would probably stand above her soon, but he didn't imagine ever getting tall enough that she wouldn't be able to encase him whole. She went back to making dinner as he settled at the table, anxiously fidgeting until she put a peeler and some carrots into his hands. His father would be home soon. Itachi came back sooner though, quiet and tired but looking serene, as he was after a full shift at the hospital. "Hello Sasuke. Welcome back." "Hi. Everything's good back there?" "Yes. You don't need to worry." Sasuke struggled a bit with knowing when to stop, how to let go. There was always someone to help and something to do at the hospital, and if left unsupervised, he would attend to it all until he dropped from exhaustion. It's not that he thought the place would fall apart without him, but he almost felt guilty as soon as he was doing anything else. Unfortunately, Tsunade was inflexible when it came to rest and proper schedules. Extremely hypocrite of her, but he couldn't protest. She was the Hokage after all. Itachi was arguably worse than Sasuke at this, he would live at the hospital if he could. She often complained about them both, but Shizune was never far to remind her that she wasn't any better. Just a few days and Sasuke had managed to miss this. Itachi filled him on what happened in his absence, and Sasuke almost relaxed fully, almost forgot the reason why he had come in the first place, and thus was stupidly caught off guard when the front door opened again and his father joined them in the kitchen. "Hello, Mikoto, when do we?" "Ah." Sasuke failed as much as his father to come up with a proper reaction. His mother had to step in with an audible sigh. "You can set the table, dinner will be ready soon." Sasuke didn't understand how he could simply have lost his ability to talk to his father like this. They were never overly close, but they used to talk to each other. He would tell his parents about his day, ask the man for advice. Where had it gone? When had this block grown into his throat, getting heavier every time he tried to casually converse with his father? Why was he so exasperated by everything the man said, even the most mundane, the most inconsequential? He didn't know how to fix this. I am meeting with the Fire Lord, his father said after 10 minutes of awkward small talks, when he finally understood why Sasuke had come. For what? Sasuke asked, and it was absurd, how he managed to sound antagonistic in that simple question. He wasn't doing it on purpose. His father's frown deepened, but he didn't comment on the tone, electing to pretend he didn't notice. To talk about the threat of the Akatsuki, mainly. I also plan on visiting Nekobat in Soraku. It's been a while since you've been there, right? It had, Sasuke just realized now. Itaki and he used to go every few months to run errands on behalf of the clan, but he didn't think they had gone ever since he had graduated from the academy, and even before that. The way his father phrased it, it almost felt like bait. Was he saying this so that Sasuke would have more incentive to come? It was nice. In a way. Is that why you think I should come? Again with the accusatory tone. It was a disease at this point. His father reined himself in, placated by a warning look from a long-suffering Mikoto. Partly. But it's also a good opportunity for you to go up to the capital, meet some administrators, see how this kind of thing goes. Sasuke let the silence hang instead of asking more, not trusting his tone. His father's eyes narrowed just for a second, a sign that he was hesitating. You have a lot to learn. If you are serious about your ambitions. The admission seemed to cost him, but he didn't sound disbelieving or disapproving like he usually did every time the topic came up. Sasuke didn't know what to say. His father took it as further doubt from his part and kept going. And it will be the three of us. We can use this time to talk. It was almost worrying. Did something happen while Sasuke was gone? This was so out of character for his father. But then again, did he know the man so well? They didn't get along and disagreed on most things, but his father wasn't a bad person, nor did Sasuke hate him at all. He felt embarrassingly giddy and pleased, like when he was a child and his father deigned to train him or watch him go through his routine, correcting his postures and advising his use of ninjutsu. It was the first time he didn't feel alone in his efforts to mend the breach, to reach out. His mother smiled at him encouragingly. He figured she had a lot to do with this turn of events. But it didn't matter, the result was the same. They could meet halfway. They could make it better. Okay. That sounds good. Okay. If his father was surprised, he didn't let it show. He seemed pleased though, and Itaki even more so, though it wasn't that easy to tell. Their mother looked at them in turn, smiling fondly. Sasuke's heart settled a little. This was something he could work with. This was something he could fix. Shizune was wrapping up Sakura's checkup when Jiraiya showed up in the examination room. Hello, student. What do you want? He held up his hands, placating. Geez, relax. I came to check on that seal. Didn't Shizune warn you? Sakura's cheeks warmed as the other woman gave her an encouraging smile. Shizune did warn her, but she had trained herself to filter out information that had the name Jiraiya in them. Ah. Yeah. She put down the mesh shirt she was about to put back on. Health checkups were mandatory after a high-ranking mission. Shizune assured her that she was fine, save from some chakra shortage that would sort itself out in a few days. Her stamina was still nothing to write home about. No funny business, she warned emptily as he approached her. He rolled his eyes, as if to say come on now. She was being unfair, probably, but she didn't like it when he was like this, all serious and competent. She knew she had nothing to fear from him though. For all his womanizer tendencies, he had never been inappropriate toward her. He had told her once that he didn't see her as a woman at all, which could have been offensive, probably, but she knew he saw most people as youngsters or even children. Even Kakashi and the other Jounin his age got the kid treatment from the Sunin. He liked mature women. She hated the fact that she knew so much of his preferences. The number of women he had hit on in front of her was distressing, but even more baffling was how many of them had reacted positively to his lewd comments and mushy eyes. Single middle-aged women inexplicably fell for that, to her endless incomprehension. Yeah, she was entitled to treating him rudely. Plus, she was already in a terrible mood. Ino had left with one of the platoons, and she was still too high-strung to seek Sasuke out after the disaster of the Suna mission. Jiraiya could bear the brunt for once. As compensation, he tapped at her chest and her back, roughly where her heart would be. Try as she might, she couldn't decipher the face he was making. Good news, bad news? She didn't know why this was even necessary. They knew very well about Naruto's seal. The Hokage came in just as Jiraiya was finishing his exam and Sakura scrambled to put her clothes back and look somewhat presentable to the other women. So? What do you think? There is indeed a seal around her heart. I will check on the Uchiha boy to be sure, but I guess it will be the same. I have no idea what it would do though. It seems. He trailed off, pensive. Sakura frowned at him when he stared for too long. We know what it does, she muttered angrily. She was not about to get over that any time soon. How dare Naruto, how dare he? Anyway, I think it's unwise to try and remove it without studying it further. It's stable enough for now. I guess as long as they don't run into Naruto again, there's not much to worry about. She wondered if he meant to be reassuring, comforting even. It didn't work. She had to run into Naruto again, because she had to give him a piece of her mind and maybe hit him on the head too. Though she would have to tread carefully now. Would he try to kill her if he saw her again? She was so angry and confused, she felt like screaming. You're free to go, Sakura. Report to the assignment desk when you're ready. Yes, Hokage-sama. Sakura stepped out of the room with a quiet sigh of relief. She still wasn't overly comfortable in Tsunade's presence. The woman was intense, her power palpable, both in the physical and political sense. She expected to be listened to and obeyed, and Sakura could never tell if her harshness was ingrained or simply due to the circumstances in her position. At least she didn't have that problem with Jiraiya. Who would take him seriously? She briefly considered hunting Sasuke down but chickened out, reasoning with herself that he would be busy and that she shouldn't bother him. Nothing to do with how she sucked at comforting him and was afraid of making things worse by saying the wrong thing. He was busy, for sure. She hesitated in front of the hospital, between going to train and trying to meet with Hinata. Ino had tasked her with making sure the girl got some breaks from time to time, because Hanabi would never suggest it and no one around them had any sway on Hinata's decisions beside her sister. Sakura didn't think she would have much luck, but at least she could disguise it as some needing to catch up on current events thing. If she was in need, Hinata wouldn't refuse her, Ino had said, and she'd sounded a little sad. Jiraiya cut her thoughts short with a heavy hand of her shoulder that had her almost flipping him over, if his reflexes weren't better than hers. It's just me, he exclaimed, having the gale to sound offended. Don't jump me like that if you don't want me to deck you. You need to chill, girl. She huffed through her nose and tried to stay calm. There was no use arguing with him. What do you want? I figured you would be up for some training. Surprise chased the anger as she stared at his nonplussed expression, as if that was a normal thing to ask. Well, it would be, just not from him. She could count on one hand the number of times he had deigned to train her without her begging him for it or annoying him to death first. You, really? Not interested? No, yes, I am. They took the direction of the training grounds. I could only use it once, she said, knowing that would be what he would focus on. It's still too much. And I wasn't fast enough. I couldn't finish off my opponent. Huh. That's too bad. She gritted her teeth. Another teacher would try to cheer her up or tell her she did her best, but he was uninterested in sparing her feelings. After 2 years enduring his callous words and thoughtless jabs, she didn't think she could ever get offended on her own behalf ever again. Still, couldn't he try? At least he didn't say something along the lines of, I told you so. It had taken her almost the entire 2 years to master the Raise Non. 1 year of relentless training, and before that, 1 year of relentlessly wearing him down until he agreed to teach her. He said it would be wasted on her, that she didn't have the reserves to pull it off. She could admit to herself that she had persevered out of sheer spite, just to prove him wrong. The technique wasn't the best fit for her, true, because it burnt massive amounts of chakra in one go. But then again it was the right fit too, because it required precision and refined control, and she excelled in both. As a result, her Raise-Non was much smaller in scale and strength than his own, but it was more focused too, easier to direct and harder to stop, with how condensed she made it. Now if only she would whip out more than one per day. "How are you, Sakura?" She almost tripped on her feet. "What? I'm okay. Why?" He seemed as baffled as she did by the turn of the conversation, yet he pushed through. "I know things went rather badly, with Naruto. So I'm asking. No such thing as sugarcoating with the great sun in Jiraiya." It sounded like he had no idea why he was even asking. Yet he was asking. Making the effort. Maybe the Hokage had bullied him into it. "It's okay," she lied, because there was no way she would spill his gut to him out of the blue, effort or not. He didn't seem offended by her standoffish answer. But he still had things to say. "I hope you won't let it go. It is hard, but some friendships are worth fighting for." She couldn't help the next question that escaped her lips. "Was it worth it for you?" His steps faltered. For a brief moment, the way he looked at her, stunned, almost betrayed. He didn't recover as quickly as he usually did. The question wasn't that easy. She didn't have the details, it wasn't like he had ever willingly shared much of anything with her. But he got drunk often, and when he was drunk he was talkative, and when he was talkative, she filled his cup again. There was the Godame in his tales, and there was Orochimaru too. He laughed talking about it, he always laughed, it was annoying. Because it was fake. It wasn't funny at all, yet he laughed. He had given chase. He never gave up. And for what? She had never wondered before because it was a given that Naruto would eventually return to them. So she didn't mind the heartache and the wild chase, she didn't mind the building resentment, having to miss him and to worry about him. None of it would matter once he was back by their side. It was a different story though, if it never came to pass. If this was hopeless, she would rather let it go right now. It was also why facing Sasuke felt so daunting at the moment. She knew he would never choose that path. Sasuke could, and would, wait forever. She was well aware it was the height of the emotions talking, that it was still too raw and bleeding for her to give it proper thoughts, that she wouldn't be so radical once she had calmed down a bit. But that was where she was at the moment. On the verge of giving it up. Of letting go. It didn't help that Jiraiya never answered her question. Sakura was avoiding him. Which was fine, it was fine, she needed time, he got it. Shikamaru was gone on his mission, the flat was empty, and so Sasuke spent all the time he could at the hospital. Those were the only places he went to, so it wasn't like Sakura couldn't find him, if she wanted to. She didn't, for now. Which was fine. Ino wasn't here to annoy him day in and day out either. He hadn't gone back to Shisui's house after last time, even if he knew they needed to finish this conversation. He needed to finish it. With anyone, really. To talk it out of his system. So when he heard a yelled, "Asuma's team is back," through the hospital corridors, he enjoyed a split second of relief and satisfaction, knowing his roommate was back. Until the tone kicked in, the sounds of a rushing stretcher and shouted out instructions in a not quite panicking but definitely not calm voice. The medic team zoomed past him, hurrying to the operation room. He only got a glimpse of Marco maintaining a respiratory ninjutsu around Asuma's lungs, the young man as pale and sickly looking as his patients, hands shaking but holding on firm. Sasuke. Still stunned, Sasuke looked back to the end of the corridor. There stood Shikamaru, haggard and trembling. His hands, arms, and chest were splashed with blood. His face too, stark red against the unusual pallor of his skin. "Sasuke. You have to." His first instinct was to step forward, to try and offer comfort, reassurance, support. But Ino and Koji could do that. It would be meaningless, it wouldn't help at all. Sasuke knew exactly what his friends needed from him. He spun around and ran to the operation room. Chapter 9. Shikamaru needed to plan. They needed to take care of both members of the Akatsuki at the same time, but separately if possible. They played in each other's strength. If Kakuzu hadn't been there to sew Hiden back together, then the Jashinist wouldn't have been able to get back into the fight into. That was a lot of blood. He should research how much blood that was, should know to make an estimation, to be able to tell if he could stay hopeful or if the cause was lost already. Was there even a point waiting, hoping? There would be no permanent solution for Hiden for now, but it didn't matter as long as he was neutralized. They had pushed him pretty far into his skills, or so Shikamaru believed. Kakuzu was another story. He had barely shown his own powers, and they would no doubt be on par with his partners, if not worse. He needed to plan. Who best to take with him? What abilities did he need, which were available? Koji and Ino would want to come, and he wouldn't refuse them. He knew them the best, knew intimately of their strengths and weaknesses, and he would need them by his side, especially if he needed to contend for his emotional distress, the intensity depending on the outcome of the night. Would they need to postpone the mission to organize funerals, or would it be better to go right away and take care of it later? He would need contingency in case his resentments and anguish took the best of him and his critical thinking. How long did they have before the duo was too far away to reach? They had hinted at staying in the area, on the tail of one of the Jinhuriki. Could he use that to his advantage? Would they expect retaliation? Would Kurane be mad at him? Was the Jinhuriki alone? Most likely, if it was only 2 members of the Akatsuki after them. They were strong, but would others come to their aid, to one side or the other? This too needed to be taken into account, but bringing too many people would become a liability, and he needed to have a perfect view of all parameters to plan efficiently, which meant a limited number of people under his command. He would need to convince the Godame to let him lead. He wondered which argument would work best on the woman. He wondered if Kurane's child would grow up without a father. Wondered if they seriously thought they hadn't guessed why she had stopped taking missions and training her team all of a sudden. His thoughts refused to cooperate, to stay on task, insisted on going back to their last game of shogi and their last shared meal and how easy it had been for his mentor to step in front of him, to protect Shikamaru's weak, useless body with his own. No matter how he tried, he couldn't escape the loop of his memories, couldn't dislodge Asuma's ashen face and bloody lips from his mind. Shikamaru sat on the cold floor of the hospital corridor and brought his hands together. This, too, he owed Asuma for. Shikamaru used to spend a lot of time in detention as a kid. After Naruto and Kiba, he was the one who was there the most. Koji came next, but only because he kept Shikamaru company, while he had to copy the lessons for the classes of the day that he hadn't bothered to pen down. It just seemed so useless to go through the hassle of taking notes when all of this was so simple and easy to remember. The teachers kept asking how he expected to review the lessons for the tests if he didn't have it written down, and he kept telling them he didn't need it, that he would remember anyway. A statement that would have been more convincing if he actually managed to perform well in the tests. The teachers were always smug when they handed back the sheets as if they were refraining from saying, "I told you so," when he received another grade slightly above average, and more detention to redo it again. But it wasn't a question of not studying enough or studying wrong. He knew all of this, it was so basic, only an idiot would fail it. But the tests were so long and boring, he couldn't manage to focus on it more than a few minutes before giving up in frustration at being asked the same dumb things over and over. He often got a, "explain your reasoning," and, "how did you get that answer," as if it wasn't obvious enough. Some teachers went as far as implying that he cheated when he didn't write 10 lines of calculation and justification for the most painfully obvious questions. He also tended to daydream a lot and nap during class, bored to death and unable to pay attention to what was being said. When he did, it wasn't any better anyway, as he would ask questions that the teachers didn't want to, or didn't know how to answer. It ended up with him being punished again if he insisted. So his grades were bad, and he went to detention. Neither bothered him. Bad grades meant no one would bother to ask more of him, as they did for well-performing kids like Sasuke or Sakura who were inexplicably eager to do more work than average. And detention was just free time, and they could mess around the classroom with the other boys, penning obscene jokes and crude drawings in textbooks, hiding the backboard eraser and chalk sticks and unscrewing the door handles to waste a few minutes for the next morning class. That was, until one day Naruto was put on sharpening Kunao duty for a whole week for all the pranks, despite their protest that he wasn't the only one involved. They had kept their distance after that. And then Shikamaru had met Asuma. It was still 3 years until he would graduate from the academy, but his future team and team leader were pretty much set in stone already. He had been made aware that this man, a former student of his father who had worked regularly under his command, would become his Jounin instructor down the line. Shikamaru was determined to hate him on sight. He knew to be subtle about it though, and people were too stupid to see through it. His father could tell sometimes, but he couldn't call him out on it in front of others. His father was often crossed with him, said he was too lazy and uncaring for his own good, but he didn't really try to talk him out of it either. His mother tried harder, mostly with scolding and forcing him to do house chores. It did little to make him more involved and responsible, but it brewed in him a strong distaste for any kind of house maintenance. One day, Asuma asked if Shikamaru played shogi, because he quite liked to play himself. His father answered for him that he did and wasn't too bad at it. Asuma offered they played. Shikamaru had no choice but to accept. He both loved and hated shogi. He liked to play with Koji, but that was because Koji didn't actually play. He sat at his end of the board and moved the pieces where Shikamaru told him to, Shikamaru pretty much playing with himself. He couldn't help it, Koji was just too average at it, Shikamaru had to correct him. He felt guilty afterward, but Koji was never mad. "I don't mind," he said. "I don't mind if you enjoy yourself." He did. It was the exception. His father played like an adult would play against a child, and every time Shikamaru tried a more advanced move, his father would look over it, dismiss it as accidental luck. And Shikamaru never tried to dispute it, because as much as he wanted to tell them sometimes, to yell to the top of his lungs, "This is easy, I can do better, I can do more," he always refrained, because what next? If they knew he could do more, they would ask more of him. And he wasn't interested. He wasn't interested in his father's life, always busy, always worrying, always with a deep scowl between his eyes, so much that it was stuck there now. He didn't want to make big decisions, to be responsible for others, to have expectations piled on his shoulders. Besides, adults didn't like it when he played well. So he resolved to go through the motion and be done with it. The game couldn't hope to hold his interest anyway if Asuma was going to treat him like a beginner, if he was going to be as mediocre at it as all the others. Except, he wasn't. Asuma cornered him on his very first opening. He was serious and still, focused on the board. Relentless in his moves. Shikamaru had no choice but to retaliate. For the very first time, it didn't cross his mind that he ought to be careful, that he was going to blow his cover. Because Asuma was methodical and vicious, because this felt more like a battle than any mock fight Shikamaru had ever been in. All other thoughts flew out of his head as he gave all his attention to the board, as he was overcome, for the first time in his life, with the urge to prove himself, to win. He did. Immediately came the regrets, the fear. What would the man say? Could it pass as dumb luck? It could have in another game, but shogi wasn't so easily cheated, and the man was good enough to recognize that Shikamaru was good too. Was better. The boy waited anxiously, but Asuma said nothing. Nothing more than "not bad, kid," before lighting up a cigarette that made Shikamaru wrinkle his nose in distaste. The man laughed at his expression. They stayed a little longer seated there on the patio, the board between them, in silence but seemingly in understanding too. It was a new feeling. If Asuma told Shikamaru's father about it, the boy wasn't there to hear, and since nothing changed, he decided not to change anything either. Except they started to play. And then, they started to talk. Shikamaru often felt like a fool in Asuma's presence. He had been so good at pretending up until now, so good at keeping his cards close to his chest, never disclosing anything he didn't want to. But the man had a way of making him talk, and he didn't even have to try that hard. Maybe it was because there didn't seem to be any expectations behind it. When he asked why Shikamaru was doing so poorly at school, he didn't try to scold him, to imply that it was a shame because he could clearly do better. He was just curious. He was seemingly uninterested in Shikamaru bettering himself, doing more. And so he tricked Shikamaru into talking. Though he didn't reveal that much, Asuma managed to coax out of him both the ridiculousness of the whole thing and how hard a time he had to stay focused on anything, to give proper attention to the task at hand. Everything was so slow and his thoughts were so fast, out with one and in with the next, and he couldn't hold on to a single one. So far Shogi was the exception. But in class the teachers would ask a question, and by the time they were done and had left the students some time, by the time they had to answer, Shikamaru had bounced 5 topics ahead and he couldn't, for the life of him, remember where he had started. I can't go all the way back, he confessed, frustrated by this absurd twisting of his own brain. Ino had told him to just stop thinking. She had not liked him replying that only she could do that so easily. Asuma didn't say that. What he said was, why is it a line? What? Your thoughts, why is it a line? What else could it be? A circle. So that the beginning is right by the end. It shouldn't have made sense. And yet. Cue them in a circle, Asuma said. He made Shikamaru visualize it. He made him close his hands, so that instead of passing through, his wandering line of thoughts would be stuck on the loop, bound to come back to him. It shouldn't have made sense, yet it worked, anyway. He closed the circle. Out with the regrets, the grief, the fear, they could wait in the queue, to be dealt later, because he needed to plan. The first moments were always frantic, assess the damage, stop the blood flow, keep the heart going. Quick decisions and even quicker actions, to buy some time, always more time, buy a little time to be able to buy some more. Then came the laser focus, as they ran their jutsu and wielded their knives, all controlled precision and patient raveling and unraveling of the life laid beneath their hands. And after that, it was the long haul. Maintain the jutsu as the flesh slowly pulled back together, control the chakra flow, the strength of the seals, the patient's condition, monitor it all for hours at end until the red light went out. The doors opened. Shikamaru only registered that very distantly. He knew he had to move, but he had to stop the flow first, to get out of his mind, not so easy a task when he had not yet thought things through to the end. Asuma had expressed concern over it, saying that they would have to find a way to snap him out of him, just in case. The fear slammed back into him full force, as he wondered if they would even get the chance now. Tsunade approached them, Sasuke on her heels. Shikamaru thought he would be able to tell, just by looking at them, but he wasn't that good at reading people, and he supposed they made a point of being undecipherable at the moment. Tsunade walked to Kurane. Shikamaru hadn't even noticed when she arrived. She was standing straight and solid, face set in a determined scowl. Unwavering. Bracing for impact. His father was here too, and it was surprising that he hadn't tried to shake Shikamaru out of his reflections. Koji had probably run interference, as he always did. He went to stand by Kurane's side. Koji took his hand, and probably Ino's in the other. Tsunade gave them the tiniest smile. We'll be watchful over the next few days. But he's out of the shallow. It shouldn't have come as a surprise, yet it did, when Shikamaru felt the tears start to fall. Sasuke should have made an effort to at least reach one of the break room, but as it was he only made it as far as the next corridor before collapsing on the floor. Just a quick rest, it couldn't hurt. He would get up and find a proper place to sleep when he could feel his legs again. He didn't hear the footsteps and startled when a juice box was thrust in his face. Here, Shikamaru said, before sitting next to him against the cold wall. After a few seconds of Sasuke staring dumbly at the box, Shikamaru rolled his eyes and planted the straw in for him, going as far as guiding Sasuke's hand to his mouth so that he could suckle on the drink. He had his own can of coffee in hand, and they drank in silence for a moment. Can you get up? Shikamaru asked once they were done, seconds away from Sasuke falling asleep right there and then. He shrugged. I could. But I don't want to. Okay. Face this way then. Puzzled, he obeyed, shuffling so that they sat cross-legged in front of each other. Shikamaru scooted closer then, shifting to Sasuke's side so that he could reach out. So that he could wrap his arms around him and hold on tight. Thank you, he whispered in Suzuki's hair. His voice was raw and packed with more emotion than Suzuki had ever seen or heard him express. He leaned into the embrace, too tired to give it back properly, but Shikamaru had to get it anyway. "Anytime," Suzuki muttered weakly. The tension was draining at last. He was often so wound up after a difficult procedure, and it wasn't the knowledge of danger past that could make him unwind, but this. This was the reward, the naked relief, the gratitude, the visible releasing of all tension and fear, a long exhale after hours or days of holding breath. He had done good. "Are you all right?" Suzuki asked after a moment, because this was still very out of character for his stoic friend. "We'll leave soon," Shikamaru said instead of answering the question. "We need to move fast if we want to catch them again." "Don't you want to wait until he wakes up?" Tsunade says it could be days. This was another kind of anxious waiting, one filled with frustration and nerves. Shikamaru didn't like to do things, but he liked to feel them even less. It made sense for him to get moving. "I can't come with you." "I know. I wanted to ask, but you should go with your father. Might do you good." "I'm not too sure about that, but yeah. I want to try." They were still hugging, Suzuki talking to the back of his friend's head, and he startled him how rare a thing it was. They had never been much for physical affection in his family, even less as the years passed in Itaki and he grew out of their childhood proximity. He had carried the distance into his relationships with his friends, it just wasn't something that came naturally to him. Sakura could drag it out of him because she dared to demand it, but a lot of them were just like him. He had never hugged Naruto. Not once. It was crazy, especially compared to the number of times he had wanted to, not as an explicit desire but a confusing urge to close the distance, to get within reach, to touch. He had never acted on it. It would have been weird, right? And probably ill-received. He still wished he had. The nagging fear that he would never get to had him press further into Shikamaru's embrace, worried, suddenly, that this could just vanish, slip from his fingers, never to be found again. He was confronted with death almost daily, yet somehow it still hit him as hard every time. How fragile it all was, how fleeting. "We'll talk more when I come back," his friend said, sensing the shift in mood maybe. Suzuki nodded wordlessly and didn't move. Shikamaru didn't either. Suzuki didn't make it to the break room on his own, but he woke up on the couch anyway. They said goodbye to Shikamaru's team at the western gate. Tsunade had agreed to let them go on the condition that they had a new Jounin leader. Kakashi would look after them, though Shikamaru was the one with a plan. Suzuki was relieved to see his former teacher go with his friends. Sai had joined them too, despite seldom taking any mission lately. Both because it was a personal matter, and because few others were available. Another team would come to their aid as soon as possible, but their resources were stretched rather thin at the moment. Suzuki could tell it worried his master a great deal. Their forces were scattered throughout the country and the village was underprotected, but it was hard to decide which threat was the most urgent to deal with. Team 10 bowed to Kurane, solemn and deferential. She didn't look happy about it. Suzuki supposed she would have rather they stayed, safe in the village and out of harm's way. He was nervous himself, even if he trusted his friends and their strength. He didn't want to have to fight against their death too. Sakura was also here, bidding a stern farewell to the team. It would have made for too big a group had she joined, so she was waiting for enough of their comrades to be cleared so that they could form another team. Tsunade would not compromise on the recovery time between missions unless there was a foreign army at their door, and even then she would probably still enforce some kind of rotation. "Good luck," Suzuki said from one side of the line, the departing team already on the other. "Please don't make me sew your guts back in." "We'll do our best," Koji promised, good-natured as always. Kurane left once they were out of sight. Suzuki glanced at Sakura. "Let's go buy something to eat," she said while he was trying to find something to open the conversation. He should know by now to leave it to her. He hummed in agreement and followed her to the shopping district, where they bought some snacks and drinks before heading to the Flower Hill. The choice was meaningful, maybe. After all, this was Team 10's special place. Shikamaru came here to nap and gaze at the clouds, Ino came to pick flowers while Sai sketched the hills and her. Koji provided them with snacks and a bit of levity when their mood turned somber. Team 8 would camp in the woods between the Inyazuka and Abarame lands, far from the Hyuga estate. For Guy's team, it was the shooting range near the academy. And for Team 7, they had the fourth training ground, the one remote enough that few people bothered to go. And they had Shisui's house, his backyard where they practiced taijutsu and wrestled with the invasive weed in exchange for baked goods, and Naruto's room, where they read comics and painted seals or, when they were tired of that, ugly flowers and silly doodles. These days Sasuke had a hard time projecting himself into the future. Imagining what their life would be like in 5, 10, 20 years, when they would be adults with added responsibilities and families to take care of. Or at least he supposed they would, but he had no idea. Would Shisui still live in this house? Would they still come to nap on the Flower Hill? Would they still all be alive? What are you thinking about? You're frowning, Sakura asked. She pressed a thumb between his eyes, teasing. He batted her hand away. It was the first time they spoke since coming back from Suna. I just wonder how we'll be like when we're older. Oh. That. Sakura munched on some crackers and didn't add anything. He wasn't sure he wanted to share his thoughts either. But he couldn't help wanting to be reassured that he wasn't the only one feeling adrift, doubting. Somehow his brain jumped to the most loaded question possible. Do you think you'll have kids? She choked on a piece of crackers and almost spit out the water he hastily handed to her. She took a moment to compose herself before glaring at him. Where is that coming from? I don't know. Her frown eased a little at his silly answer. He was never much good at this, but it worked in a way, putting people at ease because it was hard to stay somber when he was so awkward. Well, maybe? I would have to get into a relationship first. Yeah. He had no idea how people did that. She went on. I feel like we already know everybody our age in the village. It would be weird for our relationship to change, no? I know it happens all the time, but the idea that it's someone I know already. I don't know, it's weird. The thing was, they didn't exactly know all their age group. They didn't know the civilians. For all intent and purposes they were an entirely different kind. They didn't mingle with shinobi, and couples formed by a civilian and a shinobi were a rarity. She was right on that front. Most of the adults they knew, their parents and the rest of their family, their teachers and superiors, they had known each other pretty much since childhood, had gone to school together, had grown up around each other. It would most likely be the same for them. Would they start seeing someone in a new light someday, despite knowing them for years? Sasuke wasn't attracted to any of his friends. Have you ever kissed anyone before? He asked out of the blue. This time she spat her water in his face. Sasuke truly had a talent for spurting out nonsense unprompted. Sakura wiped her mouth, a little embarrassed, but she didn't apologize. He had it coming. Why are you asking that? It's relevant to our conversation. And you were gone for 2 years, so. Before she had left, they never really had anything to tell each other. They spent most of their time together already. The only time they were apart was when they went back home, and they had always been a little reluctant to talk about their home life in Naruto's vicinity. He had never made it feel like he resented it, but she couldn't help feeling bad complaining to him about her parents, especially before he went to live with Shisui. Back then there was barely anything they didn't experience together. But 2 years was a long time, and if they had gotten into the broad strokes of their time apart, they hadn't really gotten into details. Certainly not this kind of detail. What about you? She countered, mostly to hide how flustered she was. She didn't expect him to get flustered in turn. Sort of. You know. I do. Yeah. That day at the academy. She needed a moment to place the memory, before it dawned on her. It wasn't that surprising. Someone else probably wouldn't even have counted that. It was on par with kissing a friend on a dare at a birthday party or wanting to try it for practice. It was a silly mishap during recess, Naruto getting in Sasuke's face as he was known to do, and a badly timed shove pushing them together. A crash of lips, a concert of snickers and scandalized exclamations, and her two friends beat red for the next hour. All in all a fond memory. Tinged with bitterness now, like they all were, but still vibrant in her mind, and, it seemed, in Suzuki's too. Does that even count? She teased, a little mean-spirited maybe. He didn't get the bite, simply frowned, puzzled. Why not? Because it wouldn't have, she was sure, had it been anyone else. If she had a hard time picturing herself with anyone from their circle, she couldn't even entertain the idea of him being interested in anyone at all. There was only ever one person in his line of vision, she didn't think another could ever compete. He was mostly unaware of it, which was for the best. It spared him some anguish, for now. But she couldn't help worrying about it. After all, she doubted Naruto would ever be able to pay him back his devotion. All right. Well, we stayed in one tiny village for a few weeks because I kinda blew off my arm the first time I tried the full raise non. Suzuki's eyes widened and she could feel his urge to check on her arm. Maybe she would indulge him later, if only so that he would leave her alone. Anyway, it was mostly the healer's daughter who took care of me, so we became friends. It wasn't exactly the right word. The girl was blunt and fierce, hardened by a difficult life in a remote place, at the mercy of passing thieves and harsh weather. Her bedside manners were awful and Sakura had been convinced at first that the girl hated her guts. That fire wasn't hatred though. The girl had kissed her on the morning they were set to leave and wasn't there to bid them farewell with the rest of the villagers when they took the road again. There had been 3 others after that, shy brushes of a hand and a few stolen kisses among the trees. In general she had attracted more attention from boys, but somehow they couldn't hope to catch hers. Hiding this from Jiraiya had been a whole training program of its own. But she didn't know what it meant. Didn't know how she felt about those girls, didn't know if it was love and what love even was. She felt like it wasn't exactly the question, in the stories around her. Her parents loved each other, she believed, but it seemed tame and dull compared to the grand feelings described in the novels she secretly devoured in her free time. Suzuki's parents never struck her as living a deep passion either, nor Shikamaru's. Ino's mother wasn't even around most of the time. Same for Kiba's father. Hate and Yojao were in love. It always seemed a little miraculous, the way the other Jounin talked about it. She didn't find it very reassuring. Kurane and Asuma were in love too, but now. She realized they had been silent for a while, lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't so easy to talk about all this. Will Asuma be okay? He'll live. But I don't know. I don't think he'll be able to be a shinobi anymore. Kurane would have a child soon. It was a badly kept secret, Shikamaru had deduced it, Ino had acquired the information somehow, and Koji just knew, like some sort of sixth sense. By extension, all of their friends knew too. She wondered what they were supposed to do, if they weren't shinobi. Maybe it was only her. Suzuki had the hospital, Ino had the intelligence. Asuma, he could be a father. Did that count? She had no idea what else she could be. Thinking of Asuma, she was suddenly desperate to find out. Before it was too late. At least you know where you'll be. I do? Where? Well. In the Hokage's chair. No. For the first time, she saw him hesitate at the statement. She sighed. He was too easily swayed sometimes, too vulnerable to others' opinions and thoughts. How many times had she seen his father drain some solid determination out of him with just a few words? And Naruto held similar power over him, but it wasn't that much of a problem since Naruto was more than okay indulging Suzuki in whatever endeavor he wished to pursue. Until now, that was. Nothing has changed, you know, she said, failing to keep the exasperation out of her voice. She had come to dislike how much Suzuki's moods were tied to Naruto in so many different ways. There lay the fundamental difference between them. If it came to it, she believed she would be able to move on, but he wouldn't. Hasn't it? No. Not really. Your goals are the same, aren't they? Still pretty nebulous for now, but they boiled down to one main idea: things had to change. Jiraiya and Suzuki would have driven each other crazy, had he gone in her place. Jiraiya had a "there is nothing we can do about it" approach to a lot of issues, and he was often right. There was nothing they could do about how villages conducted their businesses, treated their people. As strange as it was to say it, it was one thing the man was very reasonable about. He was always down to give a hand and offer his, or her, help, but he also knew when to step back. Sasuke wouldn't. She didn't think it was a fault, but it wasn't exactly a quality either. He had a tendency to make everybody's problems his business, without pausing to consider that his help could be, at best, unneeded, at worst, unwanted. And yet, for the first time, she believed, since he had started to make his ambitions clear, she saw him waver. Hesitate. He frowned minutely, bit the inside of his lips. He was doubting. It was about Naruto surely, maybe his father too. The reason hardly mattered, she just needed to snap him out of it. She wondered if he did doubt before, but just didn't show nor tell, or if it happened when she was away. She didn't think twice about her answer. Sasuke. If you don't become Hokage, it will have to be someone else. It was so funny, how he froze, struck dumb by the most obvious statement that had eluded his reflections somehow. The thought did its round in his head and suddenly Sasuke relaxed, exhaled a relieved sigh like he was putting down a heavy load, at last. Like it was that simple. And luckily, she thought, sometimes it was. You're right. She knew it would work. After all, she had never met anyone who enforced more than him the "if you want something done, do it yourself" motto. If he could, he would do all the things, always. She supposed it wasn't that great a quality in a leader either, but she would always be there to force his hand and relieve his burdens. It couldn't be anyone else. This world, they would fix it themselves. They wouldn't leave it into someone else's hands. Sasuke's mother was strangely emotional when they said goodbyes a few days later. It was the first time all three of them would be out on a mission at the same time. Both Itachi and his father seldom left the village these days, all in all she was the one who went out the most. She wouldn't go on any mission while they were away, it was an old superstition, that it brought bad luck to leave the house empty. Ino said it stemmed from needing some excuse for the women to stay home once they got married, but she had also insisted to sleep at Shikamaru and Sasuke's flat while they were gone. To water the plants and feed the cats, she had said, although the strays could sort themselves out and Sasuke was taking Jiji with him. He had not mentioned that. He liked the sentiment, liked that when they would come back, whoever came first wouldn't find the house empty. This, he believed, was the true reason behind this tradition. To have someone to return to, always. Be careful, all right, his mother said for the 10th time that morning while fixing Sasuke's collar, again. He refrained from batting her hands away, even if her fretting made him uncomfortable, like he ought to be worried too. We will, Itachi promised, dutiful. Sasuke pointedly missed any exchange of affection between his parents, and then they were on their way. He had hoped to hear from Shikamaru and his team before leaving, but there was no news. He felt a tad guilty about wishing they had simply not found their target at all. Sakura was gone, out to give them a hand, and strangely enough Shisui had been sent along too, with Tenzo. An odd team-up, but their options were limited after all. It was a lot of people he cared about gone on the same high-risk mission, and he felt agitated and uneasy. The perspective of spending the next several days with his father and brother for company did nothing to calm his nerves. They would reach Soraku by noon the next day and stay the night, and then they would go to the capital. He was looking at a week of the three of them alone on the road, sharing meals and sleeping quarters and long hours traveling through the forests and fields of their land, knowing his friends could be in need of assistance he wouldn't be able to provide. It was, regrettably, too late to change his mind now. Your friends will be fine, Sasuke, don't worry, his father said as they made their way to the village gates. Sasuke was so caught off guard by the sudden sympathy that he didn't find anything to answer. He couldn't tell if his father's tone was condescending, did he disapprove of Sasuke's preoccupied mind? He wished he understood his father at all. He hummed. They would be fine. They had to. The duo was, indeed, after a Jinhiriki. And they did, unfortunately, bring reinforcement. What is it? What is happening? It's Roshi. He activated his seal. He needs help. Where is he? We need to go to Fire Country. Chapter 10. How is it? What do you feel? If Naruto had asked, Karen would have clicked her tongue at him, maybe snap back that she wasn't a surveillance system and that she needed more time. But when it was Yujito asking, she would just answer helpfully, tone casual, as if this was the easiest thing in the world. Judging by Fu's knowing look, she had caught onto it too and would probably tease the girl later. Naruto wouldn't risk it, so it was consolation enough. The two Akatsuki members split up. One is fighting a man in this direction, Karen pointed at the forest behind Yujito's back, while the other is around there. 3 more people with him, and Rashi too, though it's hard to say if they're engaging or not. Any corpses? Not yet. If Yujito was there, she took the lead. She was the best strategist by far, and she was level-headed and steady in all situations. Naruto was a little embarrassed sometimes by how much they looked up to her, sure that she would come to resent their constant attention. She didn't. She smiled, soft and distant. She sat at the doors of the temple while they trained to give advice and encouragement. She meditated with them, the 4 of them. They sat in a circle, and they dived in. It was easier to keep their head and control the raging of the tailed beasts when they were close, as if the proximity of their kin soothed them somehow. She was the one with the most control over her transformation and the use of her Bijuu's power, and she had the most experience. She also had a habit of cleaning up Naruto's scratches and wounds even though she knew they would be gone in a matter of hours. She said it wasn't the point. Naruto couldn't help but blush every time, a little overwhelmed. We need to split. If possible, we have to keep our association in the dark. Naruto, you go to the one who is alone. Keep your mask on and don't engage. Your task is to keep them from joining back with their partner, and to not get found out. He wanted to protest. They should want to eliminate the Akatsuki members if they could, but she narrowed her eyes at him, daring him to say more. He snarled in displeasure yet said nothing. She didn't like being contradicted, and he had agreed to leave her the lead. Karen, you keep cover, and you update us. We don't know if others will come. Fu and I will try to remove Rashi from there. Our best course of action is to let those shinobi fight the Akatsuki for us. We will leave as soon as it's safe without being followed. He still couldn't make it so that they would be able to activate his seals on their own, except for Karen, as they had designed them together. He would have to collect them one by one. They all kept one of his Hiraishin with them so that he could reach them at all times, as long as they weren't too far away. Karen would guide him if they were. Still, he didn't like when they went their separate ways. Mask up. Do your best to conceal your identity. The Akatsuki might figure it out, but not the other shinobi, and we don't know who they are yet. We might, Karen piped up, somewhat reluctant. Yujito frowned minutely, but enough that the girl squirmed under her gaze. I can't say for certain, I don't know these people, but I'm pretty sure they're from Konoha. Karen didn't look at him and he didn't either, yet it felt as if she was talking solely to him anyway. It wasn't like they didn't expect it. They were in Fire Country, it was the most likely outcome. Karen didn't want him to come, Yujito wasn't too keen either, but they couldn't spare his space displacement seals. Karen had been working hard to master it too, but the seals were replicated from that first 3-pointed kunai, and they had theorized that Naruto could bond to them easily because that wasn't anything he wanted to plague his mind about right now. It was frustrating enough not to be able to alter them the way he wanted, to have to rely on that man's skills. Naruto, do your best to stay hidden, I mean it. Don't intervene if you can help it, and knock the shinobi out if you have the chance. She didn't have the warning tone that Karen would have had in her voice, but she worried all the same. It doesn't matter where they're from, Naruto said. It wasn't exactly true and they all knew it, but it bore saying still. Because it didn't matter, it couldn't. Wherever they came from, and even if they were here to fight the Akatsuki, no shinobi, no matter their village, would be friends to them. As it stood for now, the whole world was their enemy. Naruto didn't wear his headband anymore, and the others didn't either. They were loyal to a different cause now. Still he wondered, who had come, who he would run into. No one he truly wanted to see and desperately wanted to avoid. Karen would have recognized them. It didn't matter. It didn't. Stay in touch, Yujito said, taping at the radio around her neck. Split. They ran, each to their goal. They had come to the help of Rashi, it was their sole reason for being here, and they would see to it. Naruto was glad the man had made use of his seal even if he wasn't interested in joining them. He hoped they would have a chance to talk still, that maybe Rashi would come back to the temple with them, if only for a while. The longer they spent together, the more Naruto felt settled, at peace. The Biju should have been able to reach out easily to each other, within themselves, but they couldn't. Because of their chains probably, and it took physical proximity for them to gain the spiritual one, for these spaces to merge and for the creatures to meet. It wasn't unpleasant. There was irony there somewhere, Naruto thought, at the idea that they simply wanted to reach out to their kin and be reunited with their, friends, family? They didn't know. The Biju didn't share much. Still, this was what it felt like. It was so relatable, so mundane. Maybe they were just all after the same thing. Will you shut up with your stupid longing? We are nothing alike and I'm sick of it. You can't hide it from me. I can feel it, you know? You've infected me. Maybe it was true. Just like the fox's rage could bleed through Naruto's mind, maybe he too could spill his feelings over, infiltrate the snarling beast. Either I'm right, or you are weak. The fox surged in response and Karen cursed in Naruto's ear, urging him to conceal himself and his freaky chakra better. He shouldn't have laughed. She cursed some more. He focused back on her stilted instructions but he soon didn't need it to find the fight he was looking for, as he heard a loud rumble, like the earth cracking up. He slowed down and took care of hiding his presence to the best of his abilities. That's it, really. Karen mocked, and approached the clearing. There was a mess of ninja wires strewn between the trees and his heart rate spiked for a second but no, Karen would have told him, if it was anyone they knew. Particularly this one. It wasn't Sasuke, but Naruto recognized him still. At the center of the clearing a man with the swirling red clouds of the Akatsuki stood wrapped in wires and covered in seals, utterly trapped. The earth was open beneath him, and in front stood Shikamaru. It shouldn't have come as such a surprise but he was wearing the Chunin uniform, and he looked grim and determined as he stared down his immobilized opponent, calmly answering to his provocations. There was never a doubt that Shikamaru was capable, but that he would be willing. They had probably changed a lot, all of them. They would be strangers when they met again, as Naruto had changed too, and, he believed, not in the same direction. Shikamaru lit a cigarette, took a drag. For a moment the resemblance with Asuma was striking. He flicked it at the man. Naruto couldn't decipher the seals from this distance, but their purpose became obvious when at the first touch of flame, they blew up all at once in a deafening crack. Naruto almost fell down the tree he was hiding in. The man from Akatsuki was torn to pieces, down at the bottom of the pit. And he could still speak somehow, still spew curses and threats at Shikamaru looming above him. My God will rain wrath upon you for this, he promised. Shikamaru was unfazed. I don't share your faith. He threw another exploding seal. The pit collapsed on top of the man, drowning his rageful howls, shaking the whole clearing. And this time Naruto did fell from the tree. It wasn't like Niji size, as far as she could tell. Even if they sometimes asked what she saw, she wouldn't have described it as some sort of enhanced vision. Yujito more often asked what she felt, and it was closer to the truth. Case in point, Karen's sensing worked best when she closed her eyes. She felt it all around her. Chakra, life, both intertwined. She felt its wave and current as it ran through the earth around her, and she felt its knots, entangled in a pack where life took a more definite form. It was second nature to her, but she didn't think she could have explained it to anyone even if she lent them the sense, even if they could feel what she felt. That it was Naruto by her side and Yujito across from her, that she knew that for certain, she couldn't explain it. She simply recognized them, the feel of their presence, their heat, and weight and shape. It extended far beyond her regular sight, but it wasn't evenly distributed. Strangers, she felt from a few miles away. Naruto, she could pick up, it seemed, from the other end of the country, like a compass pointing north. Karen could never get lost if she had people to return to. She knew the shinobi were from Konoha. She couldn't explain it, they just had this taste. She almost didn't tell the others, because Naruto was still shaken from their recent encounter with his friends and this had the potential to go very poorly, again, but he would have found out anyway. Better be prepared. Maybe they would avoid any drama this time. They were never very lucky though. Yujito and Fu had reached the other group, and all they had to do was escape notice with Rashi in tow. The fight was raging between the Akatsuki and the other ninja from Konoha. Their opponent was tough, as all the members of this STEM group. It was of no concern to them though, they could all kill each other and it would only be a win in her book. Of course it couldn't be that simple. Rashi got away, Yujito on his heels. Fu stayed behind though, and above that. Shit. Yujito. You have corpses on your trail. I know. We'll deal with them. Fu, why aren't you following? Don't sweat it, Red. These people are not half bad. We can finish him off. That wasn't the plan. Yujito, that wasn't the plan. We'll circle back to you, Karen, don't worry. Keep Naruto out of it and wait for us. She cursed, enraged. Once, just once, couldn't they stick to the plan? Couldn't they have consideration for her and that fact that she really didn't want to fight and that they had to get out of there as fast as possible? They had argued about going all out and taking down the two members of the Akatsuki. They hadn't only because Gaara was still a little worse for wear, but they were ready to throw hands anyway, without knowing anything about these people and their abilities. I've been working on something, for the corpses. I'll come to you. Thank you, Karen. Whatever. They thought they were invincible, with their beast and their inhuman powers, but Karen had seen Sasori and Deidara subdue the fourth Kazekage in Gaara too. She had seen entire parties being wiped out by a much smaller group, all while thinking that they would make it, it would be just fine, because they were strong and nothing could take them down. There was always stronger. It was easy to die. And of course, because things could always get worse, she caught on another presence. 3 others. Shit. What is it? 3 more incoming. Konoha. She didn't add anything. Naruto was listening and this was the last thing they needed. One of them was unknown. The second one too, but not completely. She recognized the burning coil of chakra in the eyes, bleeding red. There was a whole family of them back in that village. And the third one, she only recognized too well. Still as graceful as ever, I see, Shikamaru said, loud enough that Naruto could hear him from the other end of the clearing. He wanted to answer, still as annoying as ever, but he had to at least try and pretend they didn't know each other. I don't know what you're talking about. I knew you would come. Or I suspected, at least. I planned accordingly. He pointed at the pit, now filled with rebels, a tomb for the man trapped below. He's pretty much immortal. He won't be able to put himself back together, but just in case, wouldn't you happen to know how to seal this for good? Under his mask, Shikamaru couldn't see his expression, so Naruto didn't bother hiding his annoyance and worry. He knew it was what Shikamaru did, predict all the possible outcomes, plan for all contingencies. But to this extent. Were they so transparent in their goals? He didn't like that at all. He still approached the pit. At that very moment the Akatsuki was the bigger threat and Naruto could at least trust that Shikamaru was well aware of that too. I can try something, he said, uneasy. Shikamaru had his usual bored, uninvolved expression, but he was on a mission and he had just taken down a very dangerous opponent. Naruto wasn't about to let his guard down. He drew hastily, not his most refined work for sure, but he didn't have time to linger. He was wondering what was the best course of action. Just opt out of there and find the others? Or should he knock out Shikamaru first? Sealing, Kekai. Karen would have done a better job at it, barriers were her thing after all. But this would do. The rocks won't move as long as the seal isn't broken. Thank you. This was all so weird. The weirdest part was how similar to their previous interactions this whole exchange was. Shikamaru had always thrown Naruto a little off balance. He didn't think like others did and nobody could really parse out what went on in his head. He had the strangest reactions and inputs, when he bothered to react to anything at all. Part of it was an act, Naruto knew, because the boy did care about his friends and he could get emotional too. But his detachment wasn't fake either, just that a very few limited things could hope to catch and hold his interest. It made Naruto wonder why Shikamaru was so serious today. So, What now? Karen and the others were arguing over the comms. Naruto needed to get going. The man in the pit could be considered dealt with, that was already a win for the day, but their priority was to get out of here together and without being followed. He grabbed at the staff in his back. He hoped Shikamaru would take him seriously. You can leave. I won't go after you. What? Shikamaru started to gather his kunai and cables as if this was just a normal meeting, as if he wasn't supposed to want to subdue Naruto in any way he could. Damn, he was annoying. It will make Sasuke sad if I'm mean to you, and it's unpleasant when he's sad. Shikamaru's tone was disaffected, casual, yet it hurt, sharp and precise, unexpectedly harsh. He was also good at that. The implications, that he cared, that Sasuke cared, that they were close, that Naruto hurt him. Even if he looked detached, weren't there some accusations too? Naruto's grip tightened around his staff. It wasn't Shikamaru's place to judge him. What did he know? And did he think that he was doing Naruto a favor? That Naruto couldn't take him on? But as I said, Naruto, I knew you would come. The timing was perfect for Karen's voice to shout in his ear, they have an Uchiha with them. Naruto's body grew very cold. If Shikamaru knew he would come, he had told the others, the higher UPS, the Godame. They were coming after him. He had no qualm jumping Shikamaru and slamming a slumber seal on his forehead. The boy didn't have time to react, or didn't bother to, he was out of chakra anyway and no match for Naruto in his state, or any state probably. Naruto wouldn't be beaten by freaking Shikamaru, come on. He dragged his unconscious body to the nearest tree, just so that he wouldn't be left out there in the open, completely defenseless. He would wake up soon enough, but Naruto and the others had to be long gone by then. He had to focus on that or he would start to panic. He didn't know if it was the fox's fear pervading his thoughts or if he had made it his own along the road. It wasn't like he could even remember being subjugated by the Uchiha's dojutsu. Expect he could. He remembered the forest of death and Sasuke's forehead pressed to his, hard enough to bruise. And it wasn't Sasuke coming after him this time. It was both a disappointment and a relief. Naruto would have liked to catch a glimpse of him, as stupid and contradictory as it was. Just a glimpse. From afar, so that he could look uninterrupted. He didn't get to, last time. It made him restless and worried not to know when he would, if he would even. He shook his head, willing the thought away. Now wasn't the time. He bit at his thumb, clapped his hands together. Summon! Akito appeared out of thin air, hanging at Naruto's arm. He was becoming too heavy for this, but it was still his favorite way to answer the summon, so Naruto bunched up as the fox made his way up to perch on his shoulder. Lead me to the others? Naruto asked, already on the move. Let's go. Akito said cheerfully. The man, his name was Kakuzu, according to his partner, kept saying that he wouldn't lose to a bunch of kids. It would be his downfall, Kakashi thought. Shikamaru's careful planning had given them a definite edge in the fight, exploiting his teammates' capabilities to their max and having their opponent at a disadvantage rapidly. He had even turned Hiden's techniques against them both. It wasn't enough, but the boy had foreseen that too. After all, they had a lot of information on Hiden, the other Akatsuki member, from his fight with Asuma, but this one was too much of a mystery still. He wasn't as immortal as his partner, but he was no joke either. Shikamaru had planned for them to need more help, and had planned for them to get it too. It wasn't Naruto. Maybe it was better this way. They didn't need any more emotional blow right now. But the girl was surely one of his allies, because when the laughing face of one of Kakuzu's masks came at them next, the black tendrils of his inhuman body faster than most could be able to avoid, she leapt into the air, carried by insect-like chakra wings. More than this though, what gave it away was the feeling of chakra vastly different from anything they had encountered before. Except in Naruto and Gaara. Even if it seemed under her control, it was the same heavy power and the same fear creeping into Kakashi's veins like an instinct response to a too large threat. Her face was hidden by a mask similar to Naruto's, a 7 carved on the forehead, so Kakashi could only guess, but she seemed young, Naruto's age or maybe even younger, and she sounded cheerful, very pleased to be here battling Kakuzu. The other Jinchuriki was gone, along with the girl's partner, a young woman with a serious expression that had displayed very little hesitation at leaving her friend behind. It wasn't surprising, for the girl was holding her own well. There was an edge of savagery to the way she darted attacks at the man, the way she laughed as she escaped his attempts to strike her down. "You have to destroy those masks," Ino screamed from her venture point on the side. She too was a skilled strategist, astute and observant, and she didn't spare a thought to the fact that the girl wasn't exactly their ally, that she was an unknown variable. They had an enemy in common and Ino didn't look further than that. Similarly, the girl, Fu, was it? Didn't hesitate to follow the girl's voice, easily trusting her intel. A bunch of kids, they were anything but. Or maybe they were exactly that, and the older shinobi just failed to see that it had no meaning, that it didn't speak for the outcome of this fight at all. Kakashi couldn't be of much more help. It was absurd, the toll Kamui took over his body. It made the technique almost useless, for what was the point of an attack that left him incapacitated after one use? Not that it mattered now. The girl shattered one of the masks with a concentration of chakra Kakashi had never seen before, tightly coiled and corrosive, seemingly unstoppable. Kakuzu was steaming with rage but far from done. It didn't faze the girl at all. "You will die before I let you take any of us." It sounded like a promise. Kakashi was distracted from the fight by more people joining the fun. He went tense in anticipation of a new threat, but he recognized them soon enough. "We were sent as reinforcement," Shisui said when he reached Kakashi, though it might not be needed. Shisui had the worst timing. They heard a scream. Kakuzu had managed to trap the girl in his restraints, laughing as she struggled, and there was no time to assess the situation or ponder at it in any way. Tenzo leapt into action, sent his wood release after the man who had to duck to avoid it. He was distracted enough that Sakura could smash her swords through the black tendrils, setting the other girl free. Sakura grabbed at her and beat a hasty retreat while the wood chased Kakuzu further away. Only when they landed next to Ino and Koji did Sakura take stock of the situation. She stared at the green-haired girl, who wasn't too preoccupied with losing her mask along the way, as she smiled brightly, orange eyes crinkling in uncanny delight. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Fu, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for saving me. I'll pay you back someday." And with that she jumped back after Kakuzu. "What is going on?" Sakura asked, exasperated. Ino patted her on the shoulder, placating. "They just showed up. The man the Akatsuki was after took off. There is another woman, she followed them. We'll try to find them again," Shisui said, as casual as if he was planning a game of hide-and-seek. "You can handle it here, right?" Kakashi knew him well enough to infer that his laid-back demeanor was for appearance's sake only. This was not his type of mission and there was little reason for him to have been sent here. Either he had volunteered, or he had a specific task to fulfill. Maybe both. Naruto could still be around. Other Jinhyuriki too. Shisui held Kakashi's gaze, sure and steady. Kakashi had never had any reason not to trust him, but he had no idea what the man truly wanted, and for what it was worth he didn't know what he hoped for himself either. "Fine, you go. Sakura, you too. Ino, Koji. We will see this to the end," Ino interrupted, inflexible. "You stay here in support of Fu? Don't get far," he told the others. "We will meet back here in 1 hour, there is no use chasing them to the other side of the country with no plan." He looked insistently at Sakura as he said so, to her displeasure. He didn't doubt that if she caught a glimpse of Naruto's back, she would tail him to Wind Country without even thinking about it. They needed information more than conflicts right now. Another mask shattered with a loud crack further down the clearing. Fu's laugh rung above them, clear and chiming. "Go." Naruto had to be here, and if he was here, Sakura would find him, and if she found him, she was going to kick his ass. To her great frustration though, he wasn't the one she stumbled upon in the forest. She had been told before that she was too impulsive and that she would benefit from thinking before acting, and well, it wasn't too out there. But then what was she supposed to do when she happened upon people fighting, besides immediately getting involved? Granted, she didn't know who they were and what they were fighting for, but she recognized at least one, the one she jumped in front of to protect from a man whose ashen complexion and dead eyes made it not too much of a moral quandary to cut in half with her sword. She was impulsive, but at least she was quick-thinking, and what she had in front of her, she had guessed correctly, as the man kept trashing around despite lying in two parts on the ground, no blood in sight. They knew they would have to deal with these walking corpses again, but did it have to befall her? What the hell are you doing here? She spun around to cast a scandalized look at Karen. I just saved your face, again. You could at least be grateful. I didn't ask. Unbelievable. Sakura didn't have the time to chew her off as the severed man was already back together and ready to attack. She counted 5 more corpses, and 2 more people battling them off, a man and a woman, skilled and strong as far as she could tell. She easily fended the corpse off, but it didn't matter how weak it was if she couldn't take it out. The others seemed to arrive at a similar conclusion. This is getting us nowhere, and more are sure to come, the unknown woman said. Karen, what do you have? Sakura was tempted to reply something mean as Karen was clearly the weakest one here. She caught herself when she realized that there was really no reason to be rude and that it would be stupid too. They had a common enemy for now, but these people weren't her friends. I'm not sure it will work, but I'll try, Karen said, taking a paper seal out of her weapon pouch. I need you to bring one of them to me. Sakura rolled her eyes. That girl couldn't do anything on her own. The other 2 went to work, and well, it wasn't like Sakura had anything better to do. Karen was close to Naruto, he might come to her. Were these 2 people his friends too? He was well supported these days. It was cruel of her to resent this, but she couldn't help being jealous. He didn't give them the chance. It wasn't fair. She might have gone a little harder than necessary on the reanimated shinobi that tried to take her down. They wore headbands from IWA and she had no idea who they were, which was just perfect. They were awfully resistant, persistent too, which was also perfect, as she was very taken with the idea of pounding someone to the ground. She cut down the first corpse again, in a few more pieces to buy some more time. She brought the next one at Karen's feet, face down, and the girl hastily slapped her seal at the base of the dead shinobi's neck, where a small mark was already etched into the skin. The corpse went limp as a puppet with its strings cut off. Sakura stood up, still on high alert in case it decided to move again, but it was now as lifeless as a corpse was supposed to be. Which, okay, it was impressive, and the smug smile Karen cast at her meant she was well aware of that. Sakura frowned harder. Yujito. Good news is that it works. The woman punched a hole right through the chest of the corpse she was fighting as if it was made of smoke before focusing back on Karen with perfect calm and composure. Sakura was impressed by her serene control, the efficiency of her every move, and she wondered what kind of training she had received. Instead of the symbol of one of the hidden villages, her headband sported the kanji for 2. And the bad news? I only made 1. The other man cursed loudly and colorfully at that while the woman remained quiet, assessing. We need to leave. What is Fu's status? Karen closed her eyes, focusing her senses maybe. She had seemed skilled at it, from Sakura's limited observation the last time they had had to help each other out. Weird how this had been a thing 3 times now. She won. The man is dead, Karen exclaimed, relief clear in her tone despite her face still set in a scowl. Is your cousin on his way? He's on the other side of the fighting ground. There are others after him, we'd better snatch Fu up now and try to meet him halfway. For fuck's sake. They turned to see the man shake off yet another corpse coming at him. With another curse, he took a deep breath and spat out. Yatun. Burning grave. Lava release. Lava release? Sakura jumped away, chased by the heat. The 3 corpses let out inhuman shrieks as they were buried in molten rock. It solidified as soon as they disappeared from sight. That should hold them a while. Let's go. Are you coming with us? Yujito asked, incisive. The man shrugged. What else am I supposed to do? You were right, and it would have saved you the trip if I had followed you from the start. For now, I'll be one of you. This one, he still had his village insignia, tacked on his leather headpiece. Iwagakur, 4 tails, 5? Information on the Jin hierarchy was frustratingly scarce. In any case, he wasn't moved by the use of his fellow villagers as cannon fodders, but Sakura seemed to recall Iwa having two-tailed beasts and neither under its proper control. "What about her though?" he asked. He was pointing at her. She tensed up, although she had no idea either. She couldn't take the three of them, that was for sure. Would they go after her if she fled? It wouldn't be in their best interest. But they wouldn't let her follow them either. "We can't touch this one," Karen declared, deadpanned. Sakura glared at her. What was that supposed to mean? "Why not? Come on, don't you know? It's not that I don't want to, believe me, but I wouldn't risk it. I can't compete." Sakura decided it was best to let it go, she wouldn't get a real answer. And there were more important things to worry about. She drew a shunshin and had the satisfaction to hear Karen curse her before she vanished. Shisui wondered if the Godame knew what she was doing, sending him here. Did she just go along with it because he was willing and also the only one available then? Did she know to send him because Shikamaru had affirmed Naruto would show up? It was almost a given, and they had to at least try to bring him back in, and she knew he had the power to do that, even if they had never discussed it, and the idea that others had plans for his use of the Sharingan made him sick. Or did she believe he could reason Naruto somehow, because of their link? Was she aware of it? To what extent? Did she know, or did she know? Did she send him fully aware of what she was doing, knowing that it was an attempt at getting Naruto in line, but a futile one, just for show? Knowing that it wouldn't be successful, not because he was unable, but because he fully intended to make it so. When she said she cared about the boy, did she truly mean it? The result would be the same either way, but still he hoped that maybe she knew. That she was on their side, for real, that she understood. What face would she make when Shisui came back and said that Naruto had gotten away? What would she say? Would she be surprised? He hoped she wouldn't be. Shisui saw the fox before the boy. It wasn't any less of a shock because he was expecting it. That was the whole point of being here, and yet he didn't expect to be hit so hard by melancholia and longing as he caught a glimpse of Naruto's face for the first time in over 2 years. Nor did he expect the pang of hurt as Naruto quickly drew his mask down, hiding from view as he faced Shisui. The boy fell into a defensive position, staff in hand. Shisui understood why Sasuke had been so dejected when he came back from their mission to Suna. "Hello, Naruto." He got no answer. From what Kakashi had said, Naruto had developed the teleportation seal of the fourth Hokage. But out of his own territory, he could only jump as far as he could throw his own kunao. And Shisui didn't get his nickname out of nowhere. At least it seemed like Naruto didn't intend to fight him, but he didn't want to linger either. He threw a three-pointed kunao, he disappeared from view. But Shisui had the Sharingan, and he could sketch a shunshin faster than Naruto could throw. The boy was never the best at projectile weapons. Shisui appeared in front of him, seconds after he had popped up next to a huge, dying tree. The boy jumped, caught off guard, and Shisui realized that they had never fought much, the two of them. The sporadic training sessions they had shared were mostly about chakra control and taijutsu. Naruto had never truly met Shisui of the body flicker. Shisui couldn't know what face he was making under his mask. The Sharingan had its limits. It was a shame. Naruto jumped again. Shisui followed, again. They could cross half the forest like this, except if Naruto had scattered his kunao further away. But he wasn't trying to escape for good, for now. Shisui supposed he had to regroup with his allies first. The third time, Naruto tried to punch him. Fair enough. Shisui bent back, avoided a second punch, a kick toward his chest. Naruto jumped. Shisui followed. Naruto huffed in annoyance and Shisui could picture his scrunch-up face, his pinched lips as he tried to rein in his frustration. Shisui was no stranger to masks, he used to be in Umbu after all. They were very useful, they did a perfect job at hiding them from the world, changing them from a person with emotions and tells to a blank slate devoid of feelings. It had certainly helped to carry missions before. It was easier to kill masks rather than people. But he hated it now. He needed to see Naruto's face, the foils of his expression that he thought he hid so well but were transparent to Shisui's trained eyes, to how attuned he was to the boy's mood. Besides, he did have a purpose coming here. Naruto's attacks became more aggressive, purposeful, and Shisui had to know. Naruto had laid a seal on Sakura and Sasuke's heart. He had threatened them that he wouldn't hesitate if they tried to stop him. Shisui had to know how much he meant it. "How are you, Naruto?" he asked after dodging the swing of his staff. He couldn't tell what it was made of. The white, polished surface wasn't wood, too light and too hard when it shattered a nearby branch, though it had yet to properly hit him. He couldn't tell how much of his might Naruto was putting into the fight. Couldn't tell what it meant. "What do you want?" the boy asked back angrily. "I'm not going back. That's not why I came." "Why would you then?" It was a little disheartening that Naruto couldn't think of another reason. But maybe he didn't want to. Shisui couldn't blame him for trying to make his exile lighter to bear. Self-imposed or not, it couldn't have been easy. "I just wanted to see how you were." That gave the boy a pause. Short-lived though, before he tried and narrowly succeeded laying a seal on Shisui's arm. Chakra-consuming or paralyzing maybe. Shisui wasn't well versed enough in the art to tell the difference, and he wasn't about to let Naruto yell it to find out. "Why can't you leave me alone?" Shisui refrained from retorting that they had left him alone plenty for the 2 entire years they had heard pretty much nothing from him. But it was twice in as many weeks, so maybe it made sense for him to feel harassed. Even though they mostly happened to be running in the same direction. Shisui was just as bad as Sasuke. He just wanted to see the boy. To make sure that he was okay. And to confirm maybe, even if he didn't really doubt. He needed to be sure. So the next time he chased after this Hiraishin, he took the opportunity to snatch the mask away from Naruto's face. He didn't get what he was expecting though. All he caught was a glimpse, and all he saw was fear. Naruto's eyes wide in shock and terror. For the split second their gaze met, before he shut them tight and brought his arms in front of his face. "Don't look at me." And Shisui was slammed right back years earlier. He was bringing home a scared, scarred boy, who had just learned that he was a monster in everyone's eyes, that he would never be set free. Naruto wasn't hiding from him out of disdain or coldness. He was scared. Wasn't he always? He had grown used to Sasuke's Sharingan, but the circumstances were different, and Sasuke was a different case too. Shisui had hoped that Naruto would know, that he wouldn't doubt. But maybe that was asking too much of him. After all, what was he supposed to think? Shisui was uniquely qualified to chase after the Jinchuriki, and Shisui was here. But how could anyone believe he was here to this end? It was beyond him. As if. Naruto pushed him with all his might, eyes still tightly shut, the familiar bloody taste of the demon's chakra rising around him. Shisui watched him hide his face, snarling like a trapped beast, and he couldn't let it go like this. "Naruto? Would you look at me? Please. Come on, hey. Open your eyes. See for yourself. I'm not going back. I'm not done yet, I won't. Naruto. Look at me." Shisui stepped in, Naruto stepped back, a strange twisting of their earlier chase. Naruto couldn't just hightail out of here without looking around, so he shuffled awkwardly, panic rising. That wouldn't do. The boy tripped on a root, nearly falling flat on his back, and still he kept his arms up, still he didn't look. Shisui caught him by his shirt, put him back on his feet. Naruto stood very still, a prey now when he was so used to being the predator, chakra raging aimlessly. He didn't try to attack Shisui, didn't try to hurt him. Shisui grabbed the boy's wrist, pried them gently away from his face. His eyes were still screwed shut, chin down and shoulders up as if he could hide within himself. Shisui cupped a palm around his jaw. Naruto was still smaller than him, it was an absurd source of relief. "Didn't I promise? I won't use it on you. You won't ever see it. I promise, Naruto. You are safe here, with me." The red chakra was snuffed like a candle. A hush settled over the clearing. Naruto opened his eyes. The Sharingan enhanced everything, details, sharpness, brightness. And the colors were so different, richer and ever-changing, with nuances that weren't there when the world was the dull tones of their regular eyes. Some of them became sort of addicted to it, but no matter how trained they were, the dojutsu couldn't be maintained for that long. Besides, the more they used it the more their eyesight degraded, something they had learned the hard way. The blue of Naruto's eyes though, Shisui had ever only seen through his plain black eyes. But that was fine, they were vibrant enough anyway. And he had promised. You look well. I'm glad. Why? I trust you. I trust you. The fear gave way to disbelief, and then sadness maybe, but resolve too. I won't give up. And I won't let anyone stop me. It was a warning, plain as day, but Shisui had no intention of getting in his way. He took the time to study Naruto's face, to commit it to memory, and it was a shame not to be able to turn the Sharingan on to task really, but this would do fine. His eyes fell on the red tattoo at the base of Naruto's throat, the freedom kanji plain visible now that he no longer wore his headband around his neck and above the torn collar of his ratty black shirt. Ah. Right. Shisui smiled, relieved. He was right to come and see for himself. He didn't doubt but he was reassured still. All would be well. Do you remember what I said? Whenever you want, you can always come back. My door will always be open to you. This is your home too. You will always be welcome here. Even if I do what you have to do, Naruto, Shisui said gently. Firm too, so that Naruto would know to listen. Shisui didn't like to see doubts and pain on his face. He would leave the anger and passion to Sasuke and Sakura, who could waste the hours and the energy. It was fair by them that Naruto would feel guilty, torn over his choices since they were the ones to suffer from it. He didn't begrudge them their resentment. So, to them the settling of the scores, the work of forgiveness, the redemption. To him, the harbor. He couldn't be mad at Naruto even if he tried. Shisui had no feelings to be hurt here, he was the adult, and it was in the natural order to get his heart broken by the children under his care. Fuinjutsu. Heartbreaker seal. It hurt more than he expected, though the pain was already fading as Naruto blinked away. Shisui didn't follow, there was no point. He pictured the seal wrapped around his heart, a looming threat, and he wondered at its embrace. The girl, Fu, obliterated the last remaining mask in a fury of condensed chakra that also melted the earth around them. Kakuzu was left torn to pieces on the ground, life slowly draining out of him. Kakashi felt a strange sense of melancholia at the sight. The girl was profoundly exhausted but otherwise unharmed, and she had already put her opponent out of her mind. Shikamaru came back from the forest in a similar state, unsteady on his feet but safe and sound. Ino threw herself at him, shaking with relief, and she drew Koji with her, trapping both in her embrace. They were the only genin team of this lot to still be complete, to still have this. But none of the others were dead either, a feat, really. So it wasn't all lost to them yet, not like it was for their teacher whose ranks were decimated so early. Kakashi was so grateful that Asuma had survived. That was what they were, Asuma, Kurane and him, survivors, to their friends and teammates, to their whole age group. But the kids, maybe they would get to live, for real, live and grow old together without having to miss so many people. Sakura came running into the clearing and the world came catching up to them. Fu took a few steps away, smile turning sharper. She wasn't as light-headed as she made it look. They are trying to leave, we need to. This time it was a characteristic pop that drew their attention, one that Kakashi had heard so many times and that it felt so alien to hear again. The whisper of the Hiraishin. Damn it Fu, I told you to stop throwing my kunao away. Naruto screamed from the other end of the fighting ground, when he expected to appear right by her side. It was the point after all, give the sealed kunao to his friends and allies and he could go to them in a blink, as long as they weren't too far. Kakashi wondered at Naruto's range. He wondered if he knew about his father. He needed to know, suddenly. You've taken to it well, Naruto. Your father would be proud, he said, as if these were the words that needed to pass between his student and he, as if it would be welcome. And indeed, it wasn't. Naruto snarled under his mask. I don't have a father. He wasn't exactly wrong. Well, that was fun. Fu said to them. Let's do it again sometimes. She ran to Naruto. Sakura and the others tried to catch her, but she leapt in the air, fast on her wings. Naruto was running too. As soon as they touched, he drew the Hiraishin, they vanished. Fuck. Sakura punched a tree. The pain made her curse again. Check the description for the links to the author.